Section 48 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Eighth year, letter 73, and ninth year, letters 74 and 75. Letter 73, Imenstrom, September 8. You leave me to inexpressible solitude. With whom shall I abide when you are roaming beyond the seas? Now, indeed, I am about to be alone. You assure me that this will be no protracted voyage. It is possible, but shall I gain much by your return? The new functions which engross you unceasingly have made you forget my mountains and the promise which you gave me. Did you think Bordeaux so very near to the Alps? I shall not attempt writing until you return. I have no relish for those speculative letters which reach the intended recipient by chance only, while an answer cannot come to hand till at least 3 months have elapsed, and may not arrive for a year. As to myself, having no intention of departing from hence, I shall hope to hear from you on your voyage. I regret that M. de Fonsalbe has business to finish at Hamburg before he can transact that at Zurich, but as he foresees that the former will be prolonged, possibly the inclement season will be over before he reaches Switzerland. So you can arrange matters accordingly, just as they were planned for the autumn. Be sure that you do not start till he has promised decisively to make a stay here of at least several days. Judge whether this is of moment to me. Of you I have no hope. Leave me someone at least whom you have loved. What you tell me regarding him would give me unbounded satisfaction if I could be affected by plans so remote of fulfillment. I have no longer any wish to believe in the happy issue of uncertainties. Letter 74, Imenstrom, June 15, 9th year. The arrival of your note has filled me with extravagant joy. Bordeaux for a moment has seemed to me closer to my lake than Port-au-Prince or l'Île de Joré. So your affairs have flourished. This counts for much. It is something for the soul to feed upon when no other nourishment is available. As for me, I am steeped in profound weariness, which is not, as you know, of my seeking. On the contrary, I would find occupation, and yet I perish of inanition. It is desirable that I should be as brief as you are. I am at Imenstrom. I have heard nothing of M. de Fonsalbe, and furthermore, I no longer hope for anything. Notwithstanding, farewell, si vales bene est. June 16. When I think how you live, at once well employed and tranquil, now finding interest in what you do, and now enjoying those distractions which bring rest, I am on the verge of blaming independence, though I love it all the same. It is undeniable that man stands in need of some object to engage him, some controlling influence to lead and govern him. At the same time, it is a great advantage to be free, to choose what is suited to one's means, and to be different from the slave who works unremittingly for another. But I have ample time for testing all the futility and vanity of what I do, and this frigid estimate of the true worth of things is next door to disgust with them all. You are selling Chessel and purchasing in the neighborhood of Bordeaux. Must we never meet again? How right you were! For all that, each of us must work out his destiny. It is insufficient to appear contented. I ought to be so, it would seem, and yet I am not happy. When you have attained happiness, send me some sauterne. Till then I do not wish for it. To you, O good and wise man, whose heart obeys his reason, whom I admire and cannot imitate, to you happiness will come. You know how to use life, but for me I await it. I seek the beyond forever, as if the hours were not lost, as if eternal death were not nearer than my dreams. Letter 75, Imenstrom, June 28, 9. I will look forward no longer to better days. The months slip by, the years succeed one another, all renews itself in vain. I continue that which I was. In the midst of all that I desired, all is wanting to me. I have acquired nothing, I possess nothing. Weariness expends my duration in a lingering silence. Whether the ineffectual anxieties of life constrain me to forget natural things, whether the barren need of enjoyment drives me to their shadow, the void environs me all my days, and each season seems to extend it further about me. No friendship consoled my weariness through the long sea mists of the winter. Spring comes for nature, but for me it arrives not. The season of quickening reawakens all existence. Its invincible fire exhausts without reanimating me. I have become as an alien in the joyful world, and now the flowers have fallen, the time of the lily is overpast. The heat increases, days lengthen, and the nights are more lovely. O season of enchantment! But days of beauty to me are useless, the sweet nights to me are bitter. Peace of the deep shadows, washing of the waves, silence, moon, birds singing in the night time, sensations of the early years, what has become of you? The ghosts remain, they appear before me, they pass, repass, and withdraw as a cloud changing into 100 pallid and titanic forms. I seek in vain to enter with tranquillity into the night of the tomb. My eyes refuse to close. These ghosts of life show themselves unceasingly. They disport in silence. They approach and draw back, are swallowed up and reappear. I behold them all, and I hear nothing. They are like smoke. I seek them, and they are no more. I listen and call. My own voice is not audible, and I dwell in an intolerable emptiness, alone, lost, uncertain, overborne with disquietude and amazement, in the midst of wandering shades in space impalpable and dumb. Unfathomable nature, I am overwhelmed by thy splendor, and thy very benefits consume me. What for me are these long days? Their light begins too early, their burning noon exhausts me, and the distressing harmony of their heavenly evening consumes the ashes of my heart. The genius which slept beneath its ruins has trembled at the movement of life. The snows melt upon the mountain crowns, the stormy clouds surge in the valley. Ah, wretched that I am! The heavens kindle, the earth ripens, but sterile winter abides in me. Softened beams of the dying sun, grand shadows of enduring snows. Oh, that man should have only embittered joys when the torrent rolls afar in the universal silence, when the chalets close for the rest of the night, when the moon rises over Velan. From the moment that I left behind me that infancy which we all regret, I imagined, I was conscious of a real life, yet I experienced only fantastic sensations. I beheld the beings of the mind, but here are shadows only. I sought after harmony and found nothing but its antithesis. Then I became a prey to sadness. The void made furrows in my heart. Wants with no limit devoured me in silence, and weariness of life became my sole sentiment at the age when most people are beginning to live. Everything bodied forth to me that full universal felicity, the ideal image of which is graved in the heart of man, while its means, which seem so natural, seem also blotted out from nature. As yet I toyed merely with unknown sorrows, but when I looked upon the Alps and upon the shores of the lakes, when I was in the presence of the silence of the chalets, of the permanence and the equality of times and of outward things, I recognized the isolated marks of this preconceived nature. I saw the reflections of the moon upon schists of rock and upon eaves of wood. I beheld men without desires. I roamed over the close-cropped mountain grass. I hearkened to the sound of another world. Once more I came down to earth, and then the unquestioning faith in absolute existence evaporated. That chimera of harmonious correspondences, perfections, positive delights, that brilliant figment with which the unwithered heart beguiles itself, and at which they smile so woefully who are chilled by a greater profundity or ripened by a later time. Mutations without term, activity which knows not end, universal impenetrability, such is the limit of our knowledge concerning this world over which we reign. Some invincible destiny cancels all our dreams, and what does it supply in the space which must yet be filled? Power wearies, delight slips away, glory turns to ashes, religion is a system for the wretched. Love once wore the colors of life, but the shadow comes. The rose pales, it falls, and behold, it is the eternal night. Great was our soul, notwithstanding it willed. A task was set it. What has it performed? I have seen unmoved some ancient tree which had fructified through 2 centuries, lie prone and death-stricken on the earth. It has nourished living creatures. It has received them into its refuge. It has drunk the moisture of the air and has subsisted in despite of stormy winds. It perishes amidst other trees born of its fruit. Its destiny is fulfilled. It has obtained that which was promised it. It is no longer. It has once been. But the sapling, set by chance on the marsh edge, it sprang up wild in its strength and its pride, even as the tree of the forest depths, superabundant energy. The roots drink up fetid water. They strike into an impure slime. The stem is enfeebled and weary. Bowed by the humid winds, its head relaxes repeatedly. Its fruits, few and sickly, fall into the slough, and there are lost to no purpose. Languishing, misshapen, sere, prematurely old, and already bent over the marsh, it seems to seek the tempest which will uproot it. Its life has ceased long before its fall. End of section 48.
Section 49 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Letter 76. July 2nd. Hans has shown himself a wise man, and is remaining with me. At some 6 leagues from here, there is a brother of his who is a well-borer, and, having a number of pipes to lay, I have got him to come over, and with him also I am well satisfied. He is a discreet and honest man, simple and yet gifted with that quality of confidence which comes from natural abilities and the consciousness of inflexible probity. Though not particularly robust, he is good at his trade, and goes to work well and carefully. He is neither nervous nor officious in my presence, not cringing and not familiar. Moreover, I made personal inquiry in his village to ascertain what was thought of him there, and I even saw his wife. On my return, I directed him to sink a well at a point where at first he could scarcely see how it would be of use to me, and subsequently, while he was completing some other labours, they erected a small peasant's cottage close by it, after the style of the country, containing several rooms on a single floor, together with kitchen, barn, and stable, the whole being accommodation enough for a small household, including winter quarters for 2 cows. Behold himself and his wife installed therein, with the requisite plot of ground and some few things besides. It is true that the conduit pipes may be wanting for the moment, but my well sinker will not be wanting. His domicile was prepared in the space of 20 days, for it is one of the advantages of this kind of erection that, given the proper materials, 10 men can put it up in a couple of weeks, and there is no need to delay till the plaster dries. On the 20th day, as I have said, it was all ready. The evening was fine, and I gave orders for him to strike work a little earlier than usual. I led him up to the cottage and said to him, "This house, with its store of wood, which you can renew annually from my own, these 2 cows, and the meadow as far as that hedge, are set apart henceforth to your use, and will continue so as long as you are well conducted, which it is almost impossible for me to doubt that you will be." Let me now mention 2 facts by which you may conclude for yourself whether this man deserves all that I have done for him, and even more. Feeling apparently that the extent of his service should answer adequately for that of the gratitude of an honest heart, he insisted only on the remarkable similarity between all he saw and all that he had ever imagined as the sum of his whole ambition, that which, without any hope of obtaining, he had pictured, ever since his marriage, as the supreme good, that which alone he would have asked of heaven, could he have formulated a petition which deserved to be heard thereby. This will please you, but here is something which will surprise. He has been married for the past 8 years, and the couple have been without children. Misery has been their sole patrimony, for, burdened with a debt bequeathed to him by his father, the labor of his hands has barely secured the necessities of existence for himself and his wife. The latter is now with child. Consider the new facilities, or even chances, which a condition of habitual penury offers for the development of our faculties, and judge if one could find, among sentiments devoid of ostentation, within and without, more of native nobility or of justice. I count myself exceedingly fortunate that I possess what I do without owing it to a condition by which I should be obliged to live like a rich man and to waste in frivolities what is capable of bearing so much fruit. I acknowledge, with the moralists, that large possessions are frequently an illusory advantage, and of a kind which too often we render fatal, but I shall never allow them that an independent fortune is not one of the chief means of happiness and even of wisdom. Letter 77. July 6th. In this diversified country, where the incidents of nature, restricted within a narrow area, are in conflict with forms, products, and climates, even the human species is denied an uniform character. Racial differences are more marked here than elsewhere. In these faraway places, so long regarded as inaccessible, in these deep valleys, the antique refuge of fugitive or perishing hordes, the confusion and admixture of types has obtained in a less degree. Alien to one another, the tribes there have remained isolated within their wild confines. They have preserved as many special peculiarities in administration, language, and manners as their mountains have valleys, or perhaps even pastures and hamlets. It may happen that crossing a torrent 6 times in the course of an hour's journey, as many races will be met with, having each a distinct physiognomy and traditions, which substantiate the diversity of their origin. The existing cantons are made up of a multitude of states. The weaker among them are joined by fear, by treaty, by necessity, even by force, to the already powerful republics, and the latter, by much astuteness, by growth, by cajolery, invasion, or conquest, became, after 5 centuries of prosperity, possessors of all the district within sound of the bells of their capitals. Reputable weakness! Had they only been able to discover therein the means of that public happiness which seems so attainable in a region which is enclosed naturally, so impossible in an extensive country governed by the fatal pride of conquest and the ostentation of empire more fatal still. You will be perfectly well aware that my intention was to speak simply of physiognomical characteristics. You will, I am sure, do me this justice. In certain portions of the Oberland, in those pastures which for the most part slope to the east and the northeast, there is a whiteness of skin among the women, which would be noticeable even in towns, and at the same time a freshness of complexion which it would be rare to find in these. Furthermore, at the foot of the mountains, no great distance from Fribourg, I have met with lineaments of great beauty, the general character which has been a majestic repose. For example, the female servant of a farmer had only one noticeable point, the outline of her cheek, but it was so lovely, and it imparted to the whole of her face an expression so august and so calm, that an artist might have taken her head as an ideal model for Semiramis. However, beauty of countenance and a few wonderful or superb characteristics are quite apart from general perfection, from that grace instinct with harmony which constitutes true beauty. I have no wish to rule dogmatically over points which may be thought very delicate, but here, as it seems to me, there is a certain rudeness of form, and speaking generally, striking characteristics or beauty of the picturesque order are found rather than finished beauty. In the places which I mentioned at the outset, the upper part of the cheek is markedly prominent. Indeed, there is almost universal, and Porta would refer to it, the head of the genus Picus, as to a common prototype. Now, if it should happen that a French peasant girl were very pretty at the age of 18, before 22 her tanned face would have become tired and spiritless. In these mountains, on the contrary, the women are preserved by their haymaking in all the brilliance of youth. It is impossible to travel through their country without experiencing a surprise and yet taking only the face. If an artist made it his model, it would be only by way of an exception. It is affirmed that there is nothing so rare as a fine bust in the greater part of Switzerland. I know a painter who goes so far as to say that, in this respect, the general deficiency is so universal that most of the women cannot imagine things otherwise, and consider that pictures from nature in Greece, England, and France are merely monstrous fictions. Although this species of perfection seems to belong to a type of beauty which is foreign to this country, I cannot believe that it is universally wanting, as if the most interesting graces were excluded by the modern name of the country which unites so many families who have no community of origin and whose marked differences are still persistent. On the other hand, should the statement prove well-founded, and should it be also true that there is a certain irregularity in the form, these facts might be explained by the asperity which seems inseparable from the alpine atmosphere. It is indubitably true that Switzerland, though it can boast fine men, more especially in the vicinity of the mountains, as for example in Hall and the Haute Valais, contains notwithstanding an abnormal proportion of idiots, and above all of those half-idiots, creatures with glandular affections, imbeciles, and deformed people. Many of the inhabitants, without actually being afflicted by goitre, seem subject to kindred maladies. Such swellings and enlargements may be attributed to the coarser constituents of the water, and of the air more than all, which stop and clog the ducts, and would seem to approximate the nutriment of man to that of the vegetable. Is it possible that the land is cultivated sufficiently for other animals, but is still too savage for humanity? Or may it not also be that the plains, covered with an artificial soil by an incessant trituration, impart vapours to the atmosphere which are more adapted to the requirements of the organized being, while from rocks, quagmires, and waters that are always in darkness, there is an emanation of grosser particles, too uncultivated, so to speak, and hurtful to delicate organs? Possibly the nitre in the snow, which subsists even in midsummer, finds entrance too easily into our open pores. Snow has secret but incontestable effects on the nerves, and on men subject to gout and rheumatism, so that an effect still more concealed upon our whole organization is not out of the question. Thus nature, which qualifies all things, would compensate by unknown dangers for the romantic loveliness of the regions which are unsubdued by man. End of section 49.
Section 50 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth year, letters 78 and 79. Letter 78, Immenstrom, July 16-9. I am fully in agreement with you, and should be content with even slighter occasion to decide me to write. There is something sustaining to the soul in this commerce with thinking beings of various ages. To imagine oneself at the side of Pythagoras, Plutarch, or Ossian, or in the study of a future L, is an illusion which has a side of grandeur, and is indeed one of man's noblest hobbies. Whoever has seen the scalding tear on the cheek of the unfortunate falls to dreams of a still more alluring kind. He pictures himself imparting to the man of mournful disposition the price of the joy of his kind, forestalling the moans of the forgotten victim, restoring some strength to the desolated heart by recalling to it those perceptions, vast or consoling, which mislead some or sustain others. Some consider that our evils have only a slender ground, and that moral good is within easy reach of man. The notion of universal happiness is inferred from theoretical consequences, overlooking that force which maintains us in the state of confusion wherein the human race is lost. It is customary to proclaim our determination to oppose errors, follow natural principles, and express only what is good or may become good. Such intentions seem to render us less useless and abandoned on earth. We combine the dream of great things with the peace of an obscure life, and truly enjoy the ideal because we think that we can turn it to account. The order of things ideal is like a new world, possible but not realized. Human genius has recourse to it when seeking to conceive of a harmony in accordance with our wants, and brings back to earth more favorable modifications modeled on this supernatural type. The constant versatility of man demonstrates that he is quickly adaptable to fresh habits. By the combination of things which have been actualized in a variety of times and places, it would be possible to form a whole less unsuited to his heart than all that has been so far proposed to him. Such is my task. The close of day is reached without weariness only by some self-imposed labour, even if otherwise vain. I will approach the evening of my life, if possible, deluded and sustained by the hope of increasing those resources which have been vouchsafed to man. Illusions are necessary to my heart, too great not to long for them, and too weak to dispense with them. Since the experience of happiness is our first requirement, What shall he do who neither looks for it in the present nor dares to expect it in the future? Must he not seek its expression in a friendly eye, on the countenance of the being who is like himself? He can do no otherwise than long for the joy of his kind. He has no other happiness but that which he imparts. When he has never wakened the sensation of life in another, has caused no rejoicing, the cold of death is at the bottom of his rejected heart. He seems to finish in the darkness of the void. We hear of men who are sufficient to themselves and find nourishment in their own wisdom. If they have eternity before them, I admire and envy them. If otherwise, I fail to understand them. For myself, I not only fall far short of happiness as things now are, not only shall I never attain it, but if the reasonable suppositions which I might make should come to be realized, I should fail of it all the same. The affections of man are an abyss of greed, repentance, and errors. I do not tell you what I feel, what I wish, what I am. I no longer distinguish my necessities. I scarcely know my desires. If you believe that you are acquainted with my tastes, you will be deceived therein. You say, amidst your solitary lands and your mighty waters, where is he who no longer possesses me? Where is the friend whom I have found neither at Africa nor at the Antilles? Here is the clouded time, which would soothe his sadness. He goes forth wandering, he broods over my regrets and the void of his own years. He listens with his face to the west, as if the notes of my daughter's harp could reach his lonely ear. He sees the jasmine which covers my terrace, my grey hat moving behind the trees, the print of my shoes on the sand. He longs for the cool evening air. Vain dreams, I cry to you, I shall have already changed. And again does the same sky brood over us who have found in such different climates a land which is alien to that of our early days. In the midst of your balmy evenings, a winter wind may here terminate the scorching days. The sun has burnt up the grass in the vicinity of the cowsheds. On the morrow, the cows press eagerly forth, expecting to find it freshened by the dew of the night, but 2 feet of snow cover the roofs above them, and they must perforce drink their own milk. For myself, I am more uncertain and variable than this outlandish climate. That which today I like, or at least do not find displeasing, may be repugnant by the time that you have read about it, yet it will not be a great change. I find the weather charming, it is calm, it is quiet, and I go out of doors meaning to remain abroad a long time, but in a quarter of an hour I am back again. A squirrel, upon hearing me, has clambered to the top of a fir tree. I put aside all these notions. A blackbird is singing over my head. I retrace my steps and shut myself up in my study. After all, I must find a book which will not weary me. If someone comes in to ask me a question or to take an order, he apologizes for disturbing me, but I have really been rendered a service. This burden goes as it came. If I can secure distraction, I am content, but to find it for myself I am unable. I cling to my suffering and am in love with it so long as it lasts. When it is over, I experience an extravagant rapture. You will say that I have indeed changed. Once I was impatient of life, once I put up with it as an evil which would last but for a few months. This state of feeling now seems foreign to myself. It would be even a source of astonishment, if I were capable of astonishment, at the rapid changes of my sensations. I see no reason for leaving, and about as little for remaining. I am tired, but amidst my fatigue I recognize that it is not unpleasant to be in repose. Life at once wearies and amuses me. To appear on this scene, to grow up, to make a noise in the world, to be harassed over 1,000 things, to calculate the orbit of comets, and then after some days to sleep beneath the turf of a graveyard, that seems to me rather fantastic to follow to the end. But why pretend that it is the ingrained habit of weariness, or the misfortune of a saturnine disposition, which disturbs and confuses our desires and perceptions, which alloys our life itself with this consciousness of the lapse and vacuity of the days of man? There is no need for a melancholic humour to determine the hues of life. Ask not the son of the Incas, chained in those mines whence the gold was taken, once for the palace of his ancestors and the temple of the sun. Ask not the diligent and irreproachable labourer, begging in his infirm and despised old age. Ask not innumerable unfortunates the value of human hopes and human prosperities. Ask not Heraclitus to calculate the importance of our plans, or Hegesias the worth of life. Voltaire, loaded with success, feasted in courts and admired in Europe. Voltaire, illustrious, masterly, intellectual, generous. Seneca, upheld by wisdom, amused by honours, wealthy to the extent of 30 millions. Seneca in the shadow of the throne of the Caesars, and within an ace of himself, ascending it. Seneca of use to men, and Voltaire making sport of their delusions. These will tell you of the soul's delights, of the heart and its rest, of the value and the permanence of the progress of our days. My friend, I have yet some hours on earth. We are poor maniacs while we live, but we are non-entities when we live no more. And then there are always schemes left for completion. I have a splendid one now in my head, to measure the volume of water which falls here in the course of 10 years. As to the thermometer, I have abandoned it. It involves getting up in the middle of the night, and when the night is dark, it necessitates a light at hand, which it will be necessary to place in a cupboard, because darkness is essential to me in my bedroom, one of the few important matters in which I have not yet altered. If I am to take interest in the temperature here, I must give up neglecting what takes place elsewhere. I must arrange for observations in the deserts of Senegal and on the top of the Labrador Mountains. Another matter interests me more keenly, to ascertain whether there have been further explorations of Central Africa, those vast unknown countries where it might be possible, as I think. But I am apart from the world. If it is becoming better known, tell me, but I am not sure whether you appreciate my meaning. Letter 79, July 17, 9. If I told you that a presentiment of celebrity to come would not be to me any source of satisfaction, you would scarcely believe me out of hand. You would think that I deceived myself, and you would be right. It is very rarely that the need of self-respect is found wholly detached from the pleasure, no less natural, which is taken in the estimation of some others, and in the knowledge that we are counted among them. But the thirst for peace, and a certain indolence of soul which has increased with my disillusion, might well lead me to forget this particular fascination, as I have forgotten others. I require to be at once restrained and stimulated by the fear of that self-reproach which would be unavoidable if, ameliorating nothing, making sluggish use of things as they are, I were guilty of neglecting also the sole means of activity which accords with the obscurity of my life. Must not man prove himself something, and in one or another sense play an energetic part? If otherwise, he will lapse into despondency and abdicate the dignity of his being. He will misread his gifts, or if conscious of them, it will be only for the torment of his hard-pressed soul. He will not be heard, followed, or considered. The small modicum of good which should result even from the life of greatest nullity will be no longer in his power. Simplicity is a very beautiful and useful precept, but it has been woefully misconstrued. The mind which does not perceive the manifold phases of things will pervert the best maxims and degrade wisdom itself by depriving it of means, reducing it to penury and dishonouring it by the disorder which then results. Assuredly a man of letters, in dingy linen, housed in a garret, patching his garments and copying anything for a living, can with difficulty be of use in the world, or have the authority which is required for doing good. At 50 years old he marries the laundress whose room is on the same floor, or, supposing him to have saved anything, he marries his servant. Has he sought to render morality ridiculous, and subject it to the sarcasms of triflers? He does more outrage to opinion than the priest who is subsidized to call the world daily to a worship which he has betrayed, than the factious monk who boasts about peace and abnegation, or the charlatans of probity, of which a section of society is full, whose every phrase is larded with manners, virtues, honesty, and to whom, notwithstanding, no one would lend a shilling without security. Every man who is possessed of a just mind, and has a desire to be useful, though only in his private capacity, every one, in a word, who is worthy of any consideration, seeks for recognition. He shapes his course that he may ensure it, even in those things over which human opinion is of itself vain, provided that this care involves nothing opposed to his duties or to the essential results of his character. If there is a rule with no exception, this ought, I think, to be the one. I affirm freely that it is invariably through some vice, either of heart or judgment, that public opinion is disdained, or a disdain for the same is affected wherever justice does not itself demand the sacrifice. It is possible to obtain consideration, even in the most obscure station, given an ordered house and a certain dignity in the mode of life. It can be possessed even amidst poverty, when a name has been earned, when people know what we have done, when the manner is greater than the fortune, when a distinction is established between that which would be misery in the vulgar and the deprivation of an extreme mediocrity. The man of high character is in no case confused with the crowd, and if, in order to avoid the possibility, he must stoop to minute precautions, I conceive that he will bring himself to do so. Nor can I think that it will be the prompting of vanity. The perception of what is naturally congruous induces each man to take his proper place, or to ensure that he is set there by others. If it were a vain desire to excel, the superior man would dread the obscurity of the desert and its privations, as he dreads the lowness and wretchedness of the social dregs. But he fears to degrade himself, not to miss elevation. To fill an unimportant part is not repugnant to his nature, but from one that is opposed to his nature he indeed rebels. If a species of authority is necessary for all the actions of life, it is indispensable to the writing man. Public consideration is one of his strongest levers. Without it, he follows only a trade, and this trade becomes mean because it is substituted for a great function. It is absurd and revolting that an author should dare speak to man of his duties without being himself upright. But if the ill-conducted moralist earns only contempt, he that is unknown remains so wholly useless that his writings at least are ridiculous if he escapes from being so himself. All that should be holy among men lost force when books of philosophy, religion, and morality were exposed amidst the mire of the quays, and the solemn pages were given over to the vilest usages of commerce. Were fame and the public verdict of themselves vain, they should not be despised or neglected, since they are a great means for the attainment of the most praiseworthy and important ends. It is equally disproportionate to do nothing in view of them, or all things on their account. Great purposes accomplished are beautiful by the fact of their grandeur, and without it being necessary to dwell on their production and improvement, but it is not the same with those that are merely planned. The courage of a person who perishes at the bottom of the sea is a lost example, and it is the same with the truest thought and the wisest conception, if these are not communicated. Their utility depends on their expression, It is their celebrity which causes them to be fruitful. It might perhaps be desirable for philosophical writings to be always preceded by a good book of an entertaining character to be circulated, read, and enjoyed widely. The man with a name has greater confidence in speaking. He does more and better because he anticipates that his labour is not without its result. Unfortunately, the courage or the opportunities to take such precautions are not always forthcoming. Writings, like other things, are the sport of chance, occasionally of an unexpected kind. They are ruled by influences often foreign to our projects. To write a book simply with a view to a name is a task which is to some extent repulsive and servile. Though I admit that there are reasons which would appear to impose it upon me, I dare not undertake and should certainly abandon it. At the same time, I have no wish to make a start with the work which I am projecting. It is too important and too difficult for me ever to accomplish it perfectly. It will be much if I find it some day approaching the ideal which I have conceived. This remote prospect is, however, insufficient to sustain me. Yet it is advisable for me, I think, to turn author speedily, that I may have the courage to continue being one. I shall be making a declared stand, and in such a way that I must follow it to fulfill my destiny. End of section 50. Section 51 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth year, letters 80 and 81. Letter 80, August 2, 9. I feel in agreement with you that a romance is wanted, one of those real romances of which we have a few examples. The task, however, is great and would occupy me for a long time. From many points of view, I should not be fitted to undertake it, and for the plot, I should have to depend on inspiration. Meanwhile, I think that I will write my travels. My design is that those who read them shall follow me through the habitable world. When we have taken stock of it together and have acquired something of a common point of view, we will retrace our steps and discuss it. So do two elderly friends take a turn in the country, look about and muse without much conversation, merely pointing out objects with their canes, but in the evening, with the fire in front of them, they chat about all that they have seen in their walk. The pageant of life is full of great beauties, and we must suppose ourselves here merely for purposes of observation. We must be interested without illusion or passion, but also without indifference, as one becomes engrossed in the vicissitudes, emotions, and perils of a fictitious narrative written in an attractive style. The way of the world is a drama, coherent enough to engage our attention, varied enough to enlist interest, fixed and regulated sufficiently to satisfy the reason, to amuse us with its systems, and yet with enough of uncertainty to stimulate our desires and nourish our passions. If we were impassible during life, the idea of death would be unbearable, but we are alienated by suffering and repelled by disgust. Much impotence and many anxieties make us forget to observe, and we withdraw coldly even as we depart from a theatre, when a tiresome neighbour, the excessive heat, or the vitiated air have substituted weariness for eagerness and impatience for curiosity. What style shall I select? None. I shall write as I speak, without thinking about it. If it were necessary to do otherwise, I should not write at all. There is this difference, however, that a verbal utterance cannot be corrected, while it is possible to cancel in revising what may be likely to displease the reader. The poets and sophists of a less advanced period read their books aloud in assemblies, when the delivery had to be adapted to the style, and the latter to the way in which it would be read. The art of reading is much like that of writing. The elegances and accuracies of expression in reading are as infinite as the shades of thought. I can scarcely imagine a bad reader with a graceful manner in writing, or a just and comprehensive mind. Genius in sentiment and incapability of expression seem no less incompatible than the power to express forcibly that which we do not feel. Whatever side may be taken on the question, whether all has been said or not from the ethical standpoint, it cannot be maintained that nothing remains to be done in this the sole science of man. It is insufficient for a thing to be uttered, it must be made public, demonstrated, impressed on all, and generally acknowledged. Nothing has been accomplished until the express law has been subjected to the moral law, till public opinion has perceived the things in question under their true relationships. Disorder must be combated so long as disorder exists. Do we not daily come across things which are rather the errors of the mind than the outcome of the passions, in which there is more of blunder than perversity, which are not so much the crime of an individual as an almost inevitable effect of public negligence or absurdity? Are we no longer justified in asking those of independent fortune by what fatality they subsist in greater real want and anxiety than those who daily toil in their service? And in saying to unfaithful children, whose eyes are not opened to the degradation of their infidelity, you are veritable robbers, and of a class which the law should punish more severely than those who despoil a stranger. To open theft you add the most hateful perfidy. The dishonest servant is punished with more severity than a stranger, because he abuses a confidence, and security must be ensured, at least in one's home. Are not these considerations which obtain for any one in a fiduciary position much stronger for the son of the house? Who can deceive with more impunity? Who is wanting towards more sacred duties? From whom is it so painful to withdraw confidence? If considerations are interposed to arrest the law, there is the greater need of educating opinion rather than abandoning it, as is too often the case, of fixing its variations, and above all making it adequately respected, so that it may fulfil what our vacillating laws do not dare to undertake. Is it necessary no longer to say to women who are full of sensibility, pure intentions, youth, and frankness, why yield such inestimable advantages to the first pretender? Do you not observe in his very letters, amidst the fantastic jargon of his crass sentiments, expressions, one of which alone is sufficient to disclose the slender estimation in which he holds you and the degradation in which he feels himself? He amuses you, but he also deceives and makes sport of you. He is preparing your shame and abandonment. You would feel it and know it, but through weakness, or possibly through indolence, you risk the honour of your life. It may even happen that for the diversion of a night you will corrupt your whole existence. The law cannot touch him. He will have the sorry licence of laughing at you. How have you mistaken this wretched creature for a man? Would it not have been better to wait and to be still waiting? What a distance there is between man and man! Amiable women, do you not realize your worth? Speak not of the need of love, that does not excuse you. The paramount need is not to debase yourself, and the necessities of the heart should of themselves render you indifferent to one who has no quality of man except that of not being a woman. Do not find an excuse in the age. If our moral institutions are in their childhood, if we have confused everything, if our reason be groping in the dark, your imprudence, if less unpardonable, is not for that exonerated. So long as our soul is pure, woman's name is powerful, and seemingly the name of man can also impose somewhat upon young hearts. But whatsoever the sweetness in which these illusions hide, be not too much overcome by them. If man is the natural friend of woman, it is true also that women have often no greater enemy. All men have the promptings of their sex, but wait for him who has its soul. What can there be in common between you and the creature who is endowed only with appetites? Has it not frequently happened that we have been drawn by the feeling of happiness into the abyss of misery, that our nature has been vitiated by our most legitimate desires, and that we have become greedily intoxicated with bitterness? We have all the frankness of youth, all the longings of inexperience, all the needs of a new life, and the hope of a sincere heart. We have all the faculties of love, and we are impelled to love. We have all the means of delight, and we must ourselves be loved. We are entering upon existence. What can we do therewith in the absence of love? We have beauty, freshness, grace, suppleness, nobility, charm of manner. Why this harmony of the movements, this voluptuous modesty, this voice formed for all expression, this smile for alluring all, this glance made for the melting of the heart of man? Why this delicacy of heart and this profound sensibility? Age, desire, expedience, soul, sensibility, all demand it. It is indeed a necessity. Everything expresses, everything exacts love. This skin so soft, and of a whiteness so delicately tinted, this hand shaped for the tenderest caresses, this eye of depths unknown till it speaks and says, I consent to be loved, this breast which, apart from love, is motionless, mute, useless, and would at length wither without being rendered divine. These lineaments, these outlines, which would change without having been known, admired, possessed, these sentiments, so tender, so voluptuous and grand, the ambition of the heart, the heroism of passion. That delicious law, prescribed by the law of the world, must assuredly be fulfilled. That intoxicating part, which is known so well, which is recalled by every one, which day inspires and night commands, what young, sensible, and loving woman will dream of refusing to fill it? Cease, therefore, from imagining that just, noble, and pure hearts are other than the first to be undone. More susceptible of exaltation, they cannot fail to be led away by that which love can give. They are nourished on deceptions, believing that they are nourished on esteem. They discover that they are in love with a man because they are in love with virtue. They are betrayed by scoundrels because, unable to love truly any one but a noble man, they feel assured that he who offers to realize their chimera is of necessity such. Energy of soul, esteem, confidence, the necessity of displaying it, the necessity of having it, sacrifices to reward, fidelity to crown, hope to sustain, and advance to follow, the agitation, the unbearable disquiet of the heart and the senses, the laudable anxiety to attempt the return of so much love, the anxiety no less just of riveting, consecrating, perpetuating, immortalizing chains so dear, yet other desires, some fear, some curiosity, chances which point to it, destiny which wills it, all these combine to deliver a loving woman into the arms of Lovelace. She loves, he amuses himself. She yields herself, he amuses himself. She enjoys, he amuses himself. She dreams of perpetuity, happiness, the long enchantment of mutual affection. She is in celestial vision. She beholds that eye kindled with pleasure. She would confer a still greater felicity, but the monster amuses himself. The arms of pleasure force her into the abyss. She devours a terrible delight. On the morrow she is surprised, restless, dreamy. Sombre presentiments preface affrighting pains and a life of bitterness. Respective men, paternal tenderness, easy conscience, pride of a pure soul, fortune, honour, hope, love, all these are gone. There is no longer any question of loving and living. There are tears to feed upon, and precarious, flouted, miserable days to drag along. There is no longer any question of plunging deeper into illusions, into love, into life. There are dreams to thrust aside, there is oblivion to seek, there is death to await. Sincere and loving women, adorned with all outward graces and every charm of soul, made to be purely, tenderly, faithfully loved, love not. Letter 81, August 5, 9. You admit that morality alone should engage the writer who proposes to accomplish a great and useful end, but certain views on the nature of life towards which you think that I have hitherto seemed to lean are not in consonance with the investigation of the moral laws and the foundation of duties. I should like to avoid self-contradiction, and will strive to do so, but with the variations of incertitude I cannot reproach my weakness. I have examined to no purpose, and have brought to such examination impartiality and even severity, but I can find no real contradictions. There may be some discrepancy between different things which I have said, were these to be regarded as positive statements, as the several parts of a system or of a body of principles set out as certainties, interlinked with and deduced from one another. But detached thoughts, speculations over things impenetrable, may vary without being in contradiction. I may confess even that there is this or that conjecture as to the course of nature, which at times I find exceedingly possible, and at others much less so, according to the way in which my imagination approaches the subject. I may happen to say, necessity rules all things, and if the world on this principle be inexplicable, on any other it is impossible. But having thus interpreted the position, it may so happen on the morrow that, taking the opposite standpoint, I observe on the contrary, so many things are ruled according to intelligence, that numbers of others must also be governed thereby. Intelligence may choose among the possibilities inhering in the necessary essence of things, and the nature of such possibilities, comprised within a limited sphere, is such that, although the world can exist only after certain modes, each thing is susceptible, notwithstanding, of many different constructions. Intelligence is not sovereign over matter, but it makes use thereof. It cannot create or destroy it, it cannot denaturalize or change its laws, but it can stimulate, adapt, combine it. It is not an omnipotence, it is a vast industry, limited by the laws inherent in the essence of beings. It is a sublime alchemy, which man terms supernatural, because it exceeds his conception. Here, you will say, are two systems which cannot both be admitted. I grant it. Yet there is no contradiction, since I present them as hypotheses only. I do not maintain or even admit either in any precise way, nor do I assume to be acquainted with that which is unknowable by man. Every general system concerning the nature of existence and the laws of the world is, at most, a notion that is hazarded. A few may give credence to these their dreams, or desire that others should do so, but it is either from utter charlatanism or overweening obstinacy. For myself, I can only question, and if I say definitely that necessity rules all things, or again that a secret force is working to an end which we can at times foresee, I employ these positive expressions to save the incessant repetition of "it seems to me," "I suppose," "I imagine." Such a way of speaking can neither represent my conviction nor deceive any one, for who, unless he is demented, will affirm what it is impossible to know? It is altogether different when, forsaking these dark researches, we confine ourselves to the only human science, namely ethics. While the eye of man can discern nothing as to the essence of existences, it can see all that concerns the relations of man. We find therein a light which is adjusted to our organs. There we can discover, reason, affirm. There also we are answerable for our ideas, their connection, their agreement, their truth, and it is there that assured principles must be sought, as it is there, in fine, that contradictory consequences would be unpardonable. The study of ethics may be open to a single objection, but though this offers a serious difficulty, it is not one which need detain us. On the hypothesis that necessity rules all things, what will result from our researches, our precepts, our virtues? That it rules in such a manner is not, however, proven. The opposite sentiment obtains in man, and it is enough that in every action of life he considers that he is left to himself. In spite of destiny, the Stoic believed in virtue, and those Orientals who cling to the dogma of fatalism are like other men in respect of their actions, fears, and desires. Did I even regard the universal law of necessity as probable, I might still investigate the principles of improved human institutions. When crossing a lake on a stormy day, I might say to myself, if events are unchangeably determined, it matters little whether the rowers are drunk or not. But as it is possible that it may be otherwise, I should rather advise them not to drink till after they get ashore. If necessity rules all things, it rules also my caution herein, and in like manner the fact that I am erroneously terming it caution. I have no head for those subtleties by which it is pretended to harmonize free will with foreknowledge, choice on the part of man with absolute power in God, the infinite detestation which the author of all justice has necessarily for all sin, and the inconceivable means which he has employed to prevent or repair it, with the persistent empire of injustice and an opportunity for criminal conduct so long as we choose. I experience some difficulty in conciliating both the infinite benevolence which by its will created man and the indubitable knowledge of what would come of it with the eternity of hideous torment for 49 out of 50 of the creatures who, notwithstanding, have been loved so well. I might discourse indefinitely, like others, and with skill or learning, on these impenetrable questions, but if I ever write, I shall devote myself rather to that which concerns man socially united in his temporal life, since it seems to me that it is only by observing the consequences as to which we have assured indications that I can think of true things or give expression to things useful. I may reach a certain point in the knowledge of man, but I cannot construe nature. I can scarcely conceive of two opposed principles, co-eternally making and unmaking, of a universe formed so late out of nothing subsisting for a time only, and thus cutting the indivisible eternity into three parts. I am indisposed to speak seriously about that of which I know nothing. The natural man discerns not the things which are of the Spirit of God. Nor, on the other hand, shall I ever comprehend how man, who acknowledges intelligence in himself, can pretend that the world does not contain intelligence. Unfortunately, I can see no better how a faculty can be a substance. I shall be told that thought is not body, a physically divisible entity, and that death cannot therefore destroy it, whence, although it has begun, it is plain that it cannot end, and that as it is not body, it is of necessity spirit. I confess to my misfortune that this triumphant argument seems to me deficient in the merit of common sense. Here is one which is more serious. Since there are religions established from of old, part and parcel of our human institutions, seeming natural to our weakness and the curb or consolation of many, it is good to follow and maintain the religion of the country in which one lives. Should it be impossible to believe therein, silence must at least be preserved on this point, when writing for mankind at large, who must not be dissuaded from a faith which they love. This is your own opinion, and here is why I am unable to follow it. I have no intention to undermine a religious belief in the valleys of the Cevennes or the Apennines, nor yet in my immediate neighbourhood of Maurienne or Switzerland. But when speaking of morality, is it possible to say nothing of religions? That would be a misplaced affectation which, deceiving no one, would only embarrass my subject and destroy the coherence which alone could render it useful. We must respect, it is maintained, those opinions on which the hope of so many men reposes, and the morality of a still greater number. I regard this reserve as wise and requisite in those who treat ethical questions only in an accidental manner, or write from a diverse point of view than my own will necessarily be. But if in writing about human institutions I should omit all reference to religious systems, it would be regarded only as a concession to some dominant party, and this would call for condemnation as a weakness. In venturing to assume such a function, I must before all accept the duties which it involves. For my abilities I am unable to answer, and these will be less or more inadequate, but my intentions depend on myself, and if they are not invariably pure and steadfast, I am unworthy of so great a vocation. In literature I shall have no personal enemy, as I shall have none at any time in my private life, but when it is a question of proclaiming to man that which I regard as true, I must not be afraid of offending sect or party. I have no desire to offend any, but I have no law to accept from any. I shall attack things and not men. If men regret it, if I become an object of horror to some of them, I shall not be surprised, but this I would not even foresee. If in many kinds of writing it be possible to dispense with the mention of religions, this is a choice which is denied me, and I regret it on several accounts. Every unbiased person will acknowledge that such silence is impossible in a project like mine, the sole literary work to which I can attach importance. In writing upon the dispositions of man, and upon the general system of ethics, I shall therefore speak of religions, and assuredly in so doing I can say only that which I think. As this is unavoidable, I make no attempt to exclude from our correspondence what chance offers on the subject. Otherwise, and in despite of a certain constraint which would follow from it, I should much prefer to withhold what I feel must displease, or more correctly must afflict you. On your part, I would ask you whether, if in certain chapters I proceed to investigate religions as accidental institutions, and to speak of that which comes, as it is said, from Jerusalem, how I can be expected to do so as if I had been born at Jerusalem? I would ask you what real evil can ensue in places quickened by the European spirit, where notions are clear and conceptions disillusioned, where we live in the forgetfulness of prestige, in the unconcealed study of positive and demonstrated sciences. I would disabuse no one whose head is so empty as to say that if there were no hell, it would not be worth while to be honest. By a few such persons my book may, of course, be read, nor I do not flatter myself that no harm whatsoever can result from what I shall undertake with the intention of doing good. But possibly I may also reduce the number of those fond souls who believe only in duty through their faith in perdition. Perhaps I shall ensure the survival of duty when relics and horned demons will have ceased to be in fashion. The people at large will unavoidably come sooner or later, and in any case before long has elapsed, to disdain one of the two ideas which they have been accustomed to accept only together, and it is therefore advisable to make it plain to them that the separation of those ideas is quite possible without the neglect of the one entailing the subversion of the other. This time, as I think, is quickly drawing near. It will be recognized more universally that we must build no longer on a failing foundation the moral citadel without which we should live in a state of secret warfare, and in the midst of a more detestable perfidy than the vengeance and prolonged hatred of savage hordes. End of section 51. Section 52 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth year, letters 82, 83, and 84. Letter 82, Immenstrom, August 6, 9. Whether I shall depart from my snow-swathed mountains, whether I shall go forth to behold that smiling country of which you give me so alluring a description, where the winter is so clement, the spring so sweet, where the emerald waters break their billows which are born in America, I do not know. Those which I gaze on now come not from so far away, in the clefts of these my rocks, where, like the melancholy owl, I go in search of darkness. Such immensity would be equally ill-suited to my eyes or thoughts, and yet the regret that I am away from you increases daily. I do not chide myself on account of it. I am rather surprised. Seeking something to explain it, I discover nothing, and yet I could do no otherwise, I assure you. Some day I shall repair to you, that is settled. I long to see you in your home. I yearn to bring away from it the secret of being happy when nothing is wanting but ourselves. At the same time I will visit the Pont du Gard and the Languedoc Canal. I will gaze upon the Grande Chartreuse, but it shall be on my way and not as I return. You will know the reason. I love my retreat. I shall love it more as the days go on, but to live alone I feel that I have the strength no longer. Let us turn to other matters. In yet a few days all here will be finished. For 4 already I have been sleeping in my own room. When I let my windows remain open during the night, I can hear distinctly the plash of the fountain as the water falls into its basin. It breaks, as the breath of the wind moves it, against the iron bars designed to support the vessels brought thither to be filled. There are perhaps few natural accidents so romantic as the sound of light water falling upon still water when all is at its nocturne, and we distinguish alone in some valley's depth a torrent rolling profoundly through dense forest land in the heart of the silence. That fountain is under a wide roof, as I think I have told you. The sound of its fall has less of wildness than it would have in the open air, but it is more curious and pleasing. Sheltered, without being enclosed, resting on a good bed in the midst of the desert, possessing in one's own home the advantages of the savage state, the conveniences of luxury are joined to the strength of nature. Primeval things have been shaped, as it would seem, by our labour, but their laws have not been abrogated, and a sway so light knows, it would seem, no limits. Of such is all man. This great roof, this covering, with which you will observe that I am well satisfied, is 7 fathoms wide and more than 20 long, being in a line with the other buildings. It is, in fact, the most commodious of structures. It joins the barn and the house. Without touching the latter, it communicates therewith by a gallery of light construction, which can be cut quickly in case of fire. Coach, state coach, travelling coach, tools, firewood, carpenter's shop, spring. It holds all without confusion. One can work and wash there also, and make whatsoever is required without being distressed by the sun, the snow, or the mud. Since I hope no longer to see you here, except at some remote period, I will disclose to you my entire way of living. I will describe my whole domicile, and perhaps there will be moments when I shall depict you as sharing it with me, and us examining, deliberating, and rearranging together. Letter 83, September 24, 9. I waited with some impatience until you had finished your journeys. I have new matters to impart to you. Monsieur de Fonsalbe is here. He arrived 5 weeks ago, and has come to stay. His wife also has been here. Though he has spent some years on the sea, he is a steady and quiet man. He neither gambles, nor hunts, nor smokes. He drinks nothing, has never danced, and he does not sing. At the same time, he is not by any means melancholy, though I think that he has known much sorrow in the past. His countenance unites the pleasing indications of the soul's calm with the traces of profound misfortune. His eye, which usually expresses only a species of repose and dejection, was intended to express everything. His head is uncommon in its characteristics, and amidst his habitual calm, if a great idea or a strong sentiment should arouse him, he assumes without premeditation the silent attitude of command. I have heard an actor admired for his delivery of the "I will it, I ordain it" of Nero, but Fonsalbe would utter them better. I speak to you impartially. He is not so equable within as without, but granting that he has the misfortune or defect of an incapacity for happiness, he has too much good sense for discontent. He is just the man to work the cure of my own impatience. He has taken his stand, and what is more than this, he has proved to me beyond all contention that I also should take mine. He maintains that with a life of independence and health added, though with these only, a man must be an idiot to be happy and a fool to be miserable. You will see readily that in view of this statement I could only affirm that, for myself, I was neither one nor the other, and so I affirmed accordingly. Now it follows that I must comport myself in the future so as not to have told an untruth. I begin, nevertheless, to find something beyond independent life and health. Fonsalbe will prove a friend, and more, a friend in my loneliness. I do not say a friend as we understood the term formerly. We have both passed the age of heroics. Now it is a question of passing one's days in peace. The great things of life do not incline to me. I limit myself, you say, to an attempt at extracting some good from the little which is vouchsafed me by destiny. With such a purpose in view, it would be a fine thing to dream of friendship after the fashion of the old days. Setting aside both the friends pictured in the past and those which are to be met with in the cities, let us imagine some middle term. What does that amount to, you will ask? And I answer, too much. There is yet another thought in my mind. Fonsalbe has a son and daughter. But before going further, let me pause until my project is definitely resolved. Moreover, it implies many details which are still unknown to you, and as to which I must instruct you. I have Fonsalbe's permission already to tell you all that concerns him, in no sense regarding you as a third person, but on the one condition that you will burn the letters. Letter 84, Saint-Maurice, October 7, 9. Quite recently, an American friend of Fonsalbe paid us a flying visit on his way into Italy, and Fonsalbe accompanied him on his journey as far as Saint-Branchier, at the foot of the mountains. I also was of the party, and had reckoned on leaving them at Saint-Maurice, but I went on as far as the cascade of Pissauvage, situated between that town and Martigny, and a sight of which I had obtained previously from the road alone. There I awaited the return of the coach. The weather was pleasant, the air was calm and extremely mild, and just in my clothes as I stood, I indulged in a cold vapour bath. There is a considerable volume of water, having a fall of nearly 300 feet. I went up to it as close as seemed possible, and was just as much drenched in a moment as if I had plunged therein. I succeeded in regaining some vestige of old impressions, when seated thus amidst vapour flung towards the clouds, and not less wrapped about by the raging sound of the water, which issues from a silent iceberg, flowing from a source which is itself motionless, to be lost amidst incessant tumult, crashing downwards to hollow the abyss, and seeming to fall eternally. Thus do our years descend, and thus the ages of mankind. Brought forth by some secret necessity, the days escape from the silence, and slip past into the oblivion. The course of their hurried phantoms flows onward with monotonous sound, and is dissipated amidst incessant repetition. There remains only a smoke which works backward even as it rises, and of which the shadows that have passed already envelop that inexplicable and purposeless chain, the permanent witness of an unknown force, the bizarre and mysterious expression of the energy of the world. I must confess to you that Imenstrom, with all my reminiscences, my habits, my youthful projects, my trees, my study, everything that could distract my affections, seemed altogether small at this moment, and even abject in my eyes. That urgent penetrating water, filled as it were with motion, that solemn detonation of a falling torrent, that cloud springing ever into the air, that situation of mind and body dispelled the oblivion wherein years of laborious efforts had perhaps succeeded in plunging me. Isolated from every locality by this atmosphere of water and by this vast reverberation, I beheld all places before me and myself outside of all. Motionless, I was moved, notwithstanding, by an extraordinary impulsion. Safe amidst impending ruins, I was engulfed, as it were, by the water, and alive in the midst of the abyss. I had bidden farewell to earth, and pronounced judgment on my ridiculous life, not without a feeling of pity, but a waking dream replaced the frivolous days by days redeemed. More clearly than ever before I beheld those happy and far back leaves of the scroll of time. Moses and Lycurgus indirectly demonstrated their possibility to the world, while their future existence was proved to me in the Alps. When the men of those days gone by, in which it was not preposterous to be a man, withdrew into deep solitude within the caverns of the mountains, it was not merely to meditate on institutions which they were then projecting. Thought is not less possible at home, and if silence be essential, this also can be found in the city. Nor was it simply to impose upon the public. Some elementary miracle of magic could have been performed more easily, and would have had no less influence on imagination. But the soul, which is least in subjection, does not wholly escape from the tyranny of habit, from that conclusion which for the crowd is so persuasive, and so specious for genius itself, from that doctrine of routine which out of the commonest condition of man educes a natural evidence and demonstration of his destiny. Separation from human things is indispensable, not in order to see that they are susceptible of change, but to have the courage to believe it. Such isolation is not necessary to devise the means which should be employed, but to hope for their success. Go into retreat, and in retreat you will see. The habit of the old order is weakened. The extraordinary is judged without bias, and is a matter of romance no longer. There is faith, and, on coming forth, success. Before Fonsalbe was due to return, I made my way to the road, drenched even to the skin. He maintained that he could reach the actual situation of the waterfall without any such inconvenience. I waited to see. At first it seemed that he would succeed, but the water-spout was exceedingly fluctuating, though there was no wind at all in the valley. As we were about to retire, he was drenched in a single second, after which he permitted himself to be led, and I took him to the same spot where I had myself been seated. But I was afraid that the sudden variations of atmospheric pressure might affect his chest, which is not so strong as my own, and we retired almost immediately. So far I had striven in vain to make him understand me otherwise than by signs. But when we were some few yards away, and before he was well out of his astonishment, I asked him in a situation like this what became of the habits of a man, even of his most powerful affections, and of the passions which he believes to be unconquerable. We walked to and fro between the torrent and the roadway, agreeing that a person of the strongest organization might have no positive passion, despite his aptitude for all, and that there have been actually many such among mankind, not only among rulers of nations, but magi, gymnosophists, and the true and faithful believers of various religions, whether Islamism, Christianity, or Buddhism. The superior man has all the faculties of man, and can experience all human affections, but he pauses only at the grandest which his destiny affords him. Whosoever tolerates the subservience of great thoughts to small or selfish ideas, whosoever omits things important either for his activity or his decision, is moved by mean affections and sordid interest, is not a superior man. The latter never fails to see further than himself or his performances. Instead of being behind his destiny, he advances invariably beyond its assigned limits, and this native impulsion of his soul is in no sense the greed of power or of dignities. He is above dignities and power. He loves all that is useful, noble, and just. All that is beautiful he loves. He accepts power because he needs it to restore the beautiful and the useful, but he would by choice lead a simple life because this can be pure and good. At times he accomplishes what can be performed by human passions, but one thing to him is impossible, and that is to accomplish it by passion. The true statesman, as well as the superior man, is never passionately enamoured of women, never loves gambling or wine, but I claim in addition to all this that he is never ambitious. When he acts like those who are born to gaze upon him with astonishment, he is not influenced by the motives which are familiar to them. He is neither suspicious nor confident, neither dissimulating nor frank, neither grateful nor without gratitude. He is nothing of the kind. His heart waits, his intelligence leads. So long as he is at his place, he proceeds towards his end, which is order in its general sense, and the improvement of the condition of men. Of whomsoever we can say that he knows this weakness, or has that tendency, the same is a man like other men. But the man who is born to govern is just and absolute. When undeceived, he becomes even more. He is no longer absolute, no longer master. He is a sage. End of section 52. Section 53 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth year, letters 85 and 86. Letter 85, Imenstrom, October 12, 9. I must confess to the same fear. It was natural to conclude that the kind of indolence into which I have been plunged by my weariness would soon become almost an invincible habit. But on further reflection I felt that there was no real need for anxiety, that the evil was already within me, and that in circumstances similar to the present I should by my nature be just what I am. Yet it also seemed to me that in another situation I should be a different character altogether. The way that I vegetate in the order of things that now surrounds me would have no effect on my conduct did the time come for me to prescribe myself as much activity as there is little at present required of me. What would be the use of attempting an erect posture at the hour for repose? Why go on living in the tomb? Because a man is diligent and disinclined to squander his day, should he for that reason refuse to sleep at night? My night, I admit, is too long, but is it my fault if days are short and nights are dark in my natal season? Like any one else, I would be abroad when the summer is here, but awaiting that I sleep by the fireside during the frost. Fonsalbe is, I think, becoming somnolescent like myself. There is an incongruity altogether in keeping with the misery of man, in our sad and tranquil habits amidst the most beautiful retreat of a country which is so beautiful, and in the ease of our life amidst a few unfortunates who at the same time are more contented than we shall ever be. I must give you some account of our absurdities. You will find that, for the most part, there is no touch of bitterness in our languor. It is needless to tell you that I do not keep a large retinue. In the country, and with our way of living, there is plenty of occupation for the servants, and the bells may be pulled 10 times before any one will appear. What I have sought is convenience, and not display. I have also to avoid unnecessary expenses, and I am quite as willing to fatigue myself by pouring out water from a decanter into a glass as to ring till an able-bodied lackey is brought from the far end of the house to perform the office. As for Fonsalbe and myself, we scarcely move independently of one another, and a bell communicates from his sleeping apartment to my own, and also to my study. The mode of ringing it varies, and in this way we warn one another, not in accordance with what we want, but in accordance with our fancies, so that the bell is sounding very frequently. The more burlesque these fancies are, the more they amuse us. They are the playthings of our idleness. We are princes to this extent, and without having states to govern, we pursue our somewhat farcical caprices. We always regard it as an advantage to have something to laugh at, but with this proviso, that our laughter causes no one mortification. Some perfect puerility brings us to a pause sometimes while computing the worlds with Lambert. Sometimes also, imbued with the enthusiasm of Pindar, we amuse ourselves with the imposing strut of a guinea fowl, or the combative feats of 2 lovesick cats disputing for their inamorata. For some time past we have come to this agreement, that whichever one of us goes for half an hour without being able to sleep shall wake up the other, so that he also may have his chance of exercising patience. Similarly, he who has an amusing dream, or one calculated to produce a strong emotion, must immediately warn the other, so that when taking our tea next morning it may be explained according to the occult science of the elder world. I can now toy a little with sleep, which I have begun to recover since I have given up coffee, and either take tea very moderately, or substitute buttermilk or simple water. I used to sleep, so to speak, without being aware of it, and without repose as without enjoyment. Both in sleeping and in waking I was absolutely the same as at midday, but now I obtain for a few minutes that sensation of the gradual approach of slumber, that voluptuous drowsiness which precedes complete oblivion of life, and the daily return of which renders life tolerable to the unfortunate by its continuous suspension and division. At such times it is well to be in bed, even if one does not actually sleep. Towards morning I turn over, and though I am neither asleep nor awake, I experience a sense of comfort, and dream at such times peacefully. Furthermore, in these calm moments I find pleasure in contemplating life, which seems quite foreign to me, as if I had no part therein. What strikes me at such times above all is the babble of its ways and means, and the nothingness of its results. This vast toil of all beings, either with one end that is uncertain, sterile, perhaps even contradictory, or with many ends that are opposed and vain. The moss flourishes on the rock, which is battered by the waves, but its flower will perish. The violet blooms to no purpose under the shrub in the wilderness. Thus does man desire, and thus will he die. He is born by an accident, he makes attempts with no end in view, he battles without object, he feels and thinks in vain, he passes without having lived, while he even who has contrived to achieve life will pass in like manner. Caesar won 50 battles and conquered the Western world, but he has gone, and Mahomet and Pythagoras preceded him. The cedar which overshadowed the flock has passed like the grass which the flocks have trampled. The more we strive to see, the more we plunge into the night. All things work for their conservation and reproduction. The end of their actions is apparent. Why is that of their being concealed? The animal has organs, powers, industry to ensure his subsistence, as well as the perpetuation of his species. He works to live, and he lives; to reproduce his kind, and he reproduces it. But why live? Why perpetuate the species? I understand nothing of all this. The beast browses and dies. The man eats and dies. One morning I reflected upon everything that man does ere death overtakes him, and I was so impelled to laughter that I pulled the bell twice. At the breakfast hour, however, we never feel able to laugh, and on this particular day Fonsalbe pretended to discover a great deal that was serious in the things of art and of glory, in the transcendent sciences, the metaphysics of the Trinities, and I know not what else. After this breakfast I laid The Spirit of Things on my table and read almost the whole of one volume. I must admit to you that this system of the reparation of the world in no way repels me. It is not modern, but that can only increase its authority. It is grand, it is specious. The author has entered into the depth, and I take kindly to the excessive obscurity of his terms, for they make one the less struck with the obscurity of the things themselves. I am quite willing to believe that the hypothesis of a fortuitous degradation and a slow regeneration, of a force which vivifies, exalts, and subtilizes, and of another which corrupts and degrades, is not the least plausible of our dreams about the nature of things. I would ask only, how comes this great revolution, or how at least it should have come about? Why the whole world thus escaped from the hands of the Eternal, how it was that the Eternal permitted it, or why he was unable to prevent it, and what power, alien to the universal power, has produced the universal catastrophe. This system explains everything except the initial difficulty, but the Oriental doctrine of two contending principles was clearer. Whatever may be the answer to a question which doubtless is little intended for the dwellers on earth, I know nothing which accounts for the perpetual phenomenon, all the accidents of which overwhelm our intelligence and disconcert our curious eagerness. We see individuals combine together and multiply that they may advance with a growing and continuous force towards I know not what end, from which they are continually driven back. A celestial industry unceasingly produces by an infinity of means, while a principle of inertia, a dead force, resists coldly and extinguishes and destroys wholesale. The particular agents are all passive, but tend notwithstanding zealously towards that which they cannot conceive, and the end of this general tendency, unknown as it is to them, would seem also unknown to all that exists. Not only does the system of beings seem full of contrast in the means and of opposition in the products, but the power which moves it seems vague, restless, enervated, or counterbalanced by an indefinable force. Nature appears checked in her progress and as if embarrassed and uncertain. We believe ourselves to perceive some gleam of light in the abyss if we regard the worlds as spheres of activity, as schools of regeneration, where matter, gradually elaborated and subtilized by a principle of life, is destined to pass from the brute or passive condition to that point of exaltation and tenuity which shall at last make it fit to be impregnated with fire and pervaded with light. It will then be employed by intelligence, no longer as formless materials, but as a perfected instrument, then like a direct agent, and finally as an essential part of the one being, who will then become truly universal and truly one. The ox is strong and powerful, but he does not know it. He absorbs a vast multitude of vegetation, he devours a meadow. What important advantage does he derive from it? He ruminates, he vegetates sluggishly in the stable where he is immured by a man heavy, melancholy, useless as himself. The man will slay the ox, will eat it, and will not be better off, and after the ox is dead, the man himself will die. What then will remain of both? A handful of fertilizing matter, which will produce new grass to nourish other flesh. What a vain and uneloquent alternation of life and death! How cold an universe! Where can be the advantage of existing rather than existing not? But if this silent and terrible fermentation, which seems to beget only to immolate, to make only to unmake, to bring forth germs only to squander them, or to impart the consciousness of life only to inflict the quivering of the death struggle, if this force, which moves eternal matter amidst the darkness, casts also some gleams to show forth the light, if this power which offers battle to inertia and gives promise of existence pulverizes the work of its hands to prepare it for some grand design, if this world wherein we appear is only the first sketch of a world, if that which is foretells only that which shall be, then the astonishment which visible evil excites in us may perhaps seem to be explained. The present toils for the future, and the order of the world is that the actual world shall be consumed. This great sacrifice was necessary, and is great in our eyes alone. We pass away in the hour of disaster, but it is unavoidable, and the history of all that exists today is summed up in the one word that they have lived. A fruitful and invariable order will be the product of the agonizing crisis which destroys ourselves. The work is already begun, and the ages of life will subsist when our complaints, our hopes, and our systems will have passed away for ever. Such was the feeling of the ancients, who preserved the belief in the distress under which the whole earth labours. This vast and profound idea produced the institutions of the earlier ages, which endure in the memory of the nations as a great monument of sublime sadness. But tribes which remained barbarous, and hordes collected by fugitives who had forgotten the antique traditions during their forest wanderings, the Pelasgi, the Scythians, the Scandinavians, spread Gothic doctrines, fictions of verse-makers, and the false magic of the savages. Subsequently, the history of things has become their enigma, till the day when a man, cut off only too early, set himself to rend some part of the veil which had been spread by the barbarians. So runs my reverie, but at length some movement distracts me, my attitude changes, and the train of thought passes away. At other times I find myself in an indefinable situation. I neither sleep nor wake, and there is something pleasant in this dubious condition. I am prone to the mingling and confusing of the ideas of the day with those of slumber. Frequently I preserve something of the soft agitation which is left by a vivid, terrible, or singular dream, filled with those mysterious correspondences and that picturesque incoherence which entertain imagination. The genius of man, awake, falls short of that which the caprices of night time present to him. A short time ago I beheld a volcano in eruption, but never was the terror of a volcano so grand, so affrighting, so beautiful. I looked on from some high situation. It was, I think, the window of a palace, and there were many persons about me. It was night, but the night was illuminated. The moon and Saturn shone in the sky between scattered clouds, driven rapidly. All things else were calm. Saturn seemed nearer to the earth and larger than the moon, while his ring, white as molten metal, lighted up the vast, cultivated, and crowded plain. Far off, but clearly distinguishable, a long chain of snowy mountains, high, uplifted, and uniform, seemed to join plain and sky. I looked closer. A terrific wind blew over the country and swept away all signs of cultivation, of dwellings, of forests, leaving in a moment nothing but a desert of burning sand, red and enkindled, as it were, by some interior fire. Then the ring of Saturn dropped from the planet, slid through the heavens, and ascending with ominous swiftness, touched the high, snowy peaks, which, shaking to their base, rose up and quivered to and fro like enormous waves of a sea, moved by the quaking of the entire globe. Yet a few moments, and flames burst forth from the summits of these white billows, leaping towards heaven, then falling back and flowing in burning tides. The mountains were pallid or enkindled according as they rose or sank down in their mournful movement, and all this great disaster was accomplished in the midst of a silence more mournful still. Most likely you will think that amidst this ruin of a world I woke up full of horror before the catastrophe occurred, but my dream did not finish in accordance with the rules. As a matter of fact, it went on, while the flames burnt themselves out, and a great calm followed. Then darkness supervened. We closed the windows of the palace, fell to talking in the saloon on the subject of fireworks, and my dream continued. I have heard it said more than once that our dreams depend on things which have impressed us during the course of the day preceding. I fully admit that, in common with our ideas and sensations, they are composed only of things that are already familiar, of which we have already had experience. But I think that the mode of their composition has frequently no other relationship with the past. All that we can imagine is fabricated only from that which is, but we dream as we imagine new things, and things which frequently have no discernible connection with what we have seen previously. Some dreams return constantly in the same manner, identical to their smallest details, without our having thought of them during the intervals between their recurrence. I have seen in sleep more beautiful scenes than any which I have ever imagined, and I have always seen them the same. From my infancy upwards, I have found myself during sleep in the vicinity of one of the chief towns of Europe. The aspect of the place differed essentially from that of the country really surrounding the capital, which I have never seen, and every time I have dreamed that I was travelling towards this town, I have found the scene such as I first dreamed it, and not such as it is. Again, some 12 or 15 times I have dreamed of a place in Switzerland which I knew prior to my dreaming, but whenever I visit it in sleep it differs altogether from reality, yet is always the same as I saw it for the first time in that condition. Some weeks ago I beheld a delightful valley, so perfectly in accordance with my tastes that I doubt if such a place can exist. Last night I visited it again, and there met an old man, quite alone, who was eating mouldy bread at the door of a miserable little hut. "I have been waiting for you," he said, "and knew that you were certain to come. In a few days I shall be no more, and you will find change here." Subsequently we embarked on the lake in a small boat, which he caused to turn round and round, casting himself at last into the water. I also sank to the bottom, was drowned, and woke up. Von Salb pretends that a dream like this must be prophetic, and that I shall really see the identical lake and valley. In order that the dream may be accomplished, we have made up our minds that, should we come across such a place, I shall go on the water, provided that the boat is properly constructed, the lake calm, and no old man to be seen. Letter 86, Imenstrom, November 16/9. Your shrewdness has not failed to perceive what, for my own part, I have scarcely so much as hinted. You conclude thence that I consider myself destined for a celibate, and I must confess that he who anticipates that destiny is very near to incurring it. Seeing that the impulsion of life is lost when stripped of its most ingenuous falsities, I think with you that more may be spent than gained by standing too much on the defensive, by avoiding that hazardous bond which promises so many delights and occasions so much of bitterness. Domestic life without it is void and cold, above all for the sedentary man. Happy is he who is neither condemned to live solitary, nor to regret that he is not alone. I find nothing that can be honestly denied or disputed in your observations regarding marriage. That to which I should take exception is that precisely to which you make no reference. I hold it as proven that men ought to marry, yet that which is duty under one aspect may become madness, folly, or crime under another. It is not so easy to conciliate the several principles which rule our conduct. The celibate in general is justly recognized as an evil, but that any given individual can be blamed for adopting this state is altogether another question. It is true that to say this is equivalent to defending myself, and that anything which I advance tends to excuse me in my own eyes, but can it signify that the cause is mine so long as it is good? In its favour I have only to make a single observation, and it seems to me one the justice of which is evident. I am fortunate in making it to you who, on a certain memorable evening, would have openly contested with me the necessity of a reformation designed to bring unity, harmony, and simplicity within the range of our duties; to you who charged me with exaggeration when I argued that it was more difficult and less common to have sufficient discernment to recognize duty than to find adequate strength for following it. You had on your side a formidable array of authorities, ancient and modern. On mine there were equally great, and on this point the best of intentions may well have betrayed a Solon, a Cicero, and even others. Our moral code is presumed to be complete, and there remains therefore nothing to say to mankind except to direct them to obey it. Take their good faith for granted, and it must follow that they will be always just. But for myself, I am so unfortunate as to think that such a code still remains to be made. I am one among those who discern contradictions therein, the prolific sources of incertitude, and I sympathize with those upright persons who are more embarrassed in the choice than weak as regards its execution. I have met with cases over which I defy any man, however uninfluenced by personal considerations, to pronounce without hesitation, and about which the most skilled moralist will never decide as quickly as may often be necessary to act. But among all these difficult cases I will lay stress only on one. It is that over which I must clear myself, and I therefore return to it. The happiness of a woman must be guaranteed, and that of her children prepared, and hence all must be arranged so that there may be certitude, or at least a strong probability, on this point. We owe it also to ourselves and to the rest of our future duties to make sure of our ability to fulfil them, and consequently the likelihood of being in a position which permits such fulfilment, or at least offers us the modicum of happiness necessary to the utilization of life. It is both an error and an imprudence to choose a woman who will fill our days with disorder, disgust, or opprobrium, one who must be cast off or abandoned, or one with whom all mutual felicity will be impossible. It is a mistake to give birth to beings for whom we can probably do nothing. We must be reasonably assured, if not of our ability to leave them in an independent position, that we can at least equip them with the moral advantages of education and the opportunity of being something, of fulfilling in society a position neither sordid nor dishonest. In the course of a journey it is difficult to choose our lodging for the night in advance, and we therefore make shift with any inn that we meet with. But at least you take care in selecting your more permanent abode, and would hesitate to fix yourself for life or purchase an estate without ascertaining whether you are likely to be suited. For all the more reason you will not make a choice at hazard which is of much higher importance, not in itself alone, but because it is irrevocable. An absolute or chimerical perfection must not, of course, be aspired to. We must not seek in another for that which we dare not pretend to offer them ourselves, and pass judgment on that which offers itself with so much severity as to preclude us from attaining what we seek. But shall we approve for all that of the impatient man who casts himself into the first comer's arms, and in 3 months will be compelled to break with the companion thus inconsiderately chosen, or to debar himself through all his life from a true union, so as to perpetuate one that is false? These difficulties in marriage are not the same for all. They are special in a sense to a certain class of men, and in that class are frequent and great. We are answerable for the destiny of another, are subject to a multitude of considerations, and it may so chance that circumstances permit no reasonable choice up to the age when none can be expected. End of section 53. Section 54 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth year, letter 87. November 29. How great is the confusion of life, and how difficult is the art of self-conduct therein! What disappointments follow on well-doing! What disorders after sacrificing all to order! What troubles through seeking to regulate everything, when our destiny refused all law! You will scarcely imagine what I am introducing by this preamble, but engrossed by Fonsalbe, full of the idea of his weariness, of all that has happened to him, and all that must yet befall him, of all which I know or that he has told me, I feel in the presence of an abyss of injustice, aversion, remorse, and more deplorable in this sequence of miseries, I see nothing which in itself is surprising, and nothing that is peculiar to him. Were it possible to know all secrets, to penetrate the concealed places of the heart, and perceive the bitterness which fills it, our contented men, our pleasant homes, our cheerful circles would be nothing but a multitude of unfortunates striving with the chain which binds them, and swallowing the troubled lees of that cup of suffering to which they can see no bottom. All their sufferings they veil, all their false joys they magnify, striving to display them before jealous eyes, forever vigilant of others. They take up a position of vantage, so that the tears which fill their eyes may impart to them an apparent glitter, to be envied at a distance as if they were the expression of pleasure. The pretense of happiness fills the first place among social vanities. Each man feigns to sympathize with all, but poses in such a way as to invite felicitations from all. Should he speak of his troubles to a confidant, his eye, his lip, his demeanor, all indicate suffering, and despite the force of his character, deep sighs accuse his lamentable destiny, while his behavior is that of a man whose only resource is death. Yet immediately a stranger enters, you observe that his head is thrown up, his brow lightens, his eye is steady, he creates the impression of a man who is not to be subdued by adversities, of one who sports with fate and can pay the price of his pleasures. There is nothing even to his necktie that is not arranged in a smarter manner. He moves like a man who, under the emotion of felicity, defers to the greater findings of his destiny. This vain parade, this passion for seemly exteriors, is unknown only to fools, and almost everybody is the dupe of it, notwithstanding. The entertainment from which you are absent appears enjoyable, though that which you are actually attending is only an additional burden. You speak of another as possessing 100 advantages, and if you are told that your own equal or exceed them, you reply that it may seem so, but, O deluded man, has he not also these buts? Each of these fortunate persons appears with his company face, even as the common people come out in their Sunday clothes. In garret and closet the wretchedness remains behind all the same. Joy, or at least patience, may be seen on the lip. Discouragement, sufferings, the frenzy of passion, and weariness are in the depth of the lacerated heart. The exterior of all this vast concourse is artifice. It may be brilliant, it is at least supportable, but it is frightful within. It is on such conditions that we have earned the possibility of hope. Unless we thought that others were better placed than ourselves, and that hence an improvement is possible in our own condition, which of us would drag on to the end of his imbecile days? Actuated by a project which was well planned and promising, if a little romantic, Fonsalbe set out for Spanish America. He was delayed at Martinique by an incident of a bizarre kind, which, though it promised to be short, had nevertheless prolonged consequences. Compelled at length to abandon his previous designs, he decided on the return voyage, and only waited opportunity. A distant relative with whom he was staying in the Antilles fell ill and died at the end of a few days. On his deathbed he gave Fonsalbe to understand that his last consolation would be to bequeath him his daughter, whose happiness he believed would be assured in this manner. Fonsalbe, who had given her no thought, objected that as they had lived for 6 months in the same house without having formed any special intimacy, he had no doubt that he was and must remain indifferent in her eyes. The father, persisting, assured him that his daughter was disposed to love him, and had confessed it when refusing to contract another marriage. Fonsalbe, though he protested no longer, still hesitated in his own mind. For his defeated projects he substituted that of filling, amiably and honourably, the duties of an obscure life, ensuring the happiness of a woman, and begetting children early in order to form their character. He imagined that the defects of the lady designed for him were those of education only, and that her good qualities were natural. So he decided and passed his word. The father died, as I have said. Some months elapsed. The son and daughter arranged to divide the property which was left to them. A war was being waged in the islands, and the ships of the enemy were cruising in the vicinity. An attack was expected, and under this pretext the future brother-in-law of Fonsalbe arranged everything for a sudden departure, when necessary, to a place of security. But during the night he repaired to the fleet with all the negroes of the plantation, carrying everything portable with him. It was ascertained afterwards that he had settled in an island belonging to the English, where he had fallen upon evil days. Thus despoiled, his sister seemed fearful that Fonsalbe might abandon her in spite of his promise. Thereupon he precipitated the marriage for which he had been waiting the consent of his family, but such a suspicion, to which he condescended to make no answer, was ill calculated to increase his esteem for a woman whom he thus took to himself without any opinion, good or bad, concerning her, or any other sentiment than an ordinary friendship. It is quite possible for a union without love to be a happy one, but their characters were in little agreement. They had, however, something in common, and it is in such a case that love would, I think, avail to bring them wholly into unison. Reason would have been possibly a sufficient impulse, but its full action is only in the heart of order, and their condition was opposed to a consistent and regulated life. We live once only, and naturally we cling to our system, when it is at the same time that of reason and of the heart. We feel warranted in venturing on the good which will never be accomplished if we wait for certainties. Whether you will look at it from my point of view, I do not know, but Fonsalbe, I think, did well. He has been punished for it, but this was of necessity. But was he therefore in the wrong? If we have only once to live, real duty, sole consolation of a fleeting existence, sacred morality, wisdom of the heart of man. He has broken none of your laws. He has put away some few transitory notions. He has ignored our petty conventions. The custom of a corner of the world, the legislation of a suburb would condemn him, but those men of antiquity whom we have revered for 3,000 years, those just and great men, they assuredly would have acted and did act as he has. The more I know of Fonsalbe, the more I see that we are destined to remain together. We have decided to do so, and the nature of things settled it before ourselves. I am glad that he has no profession. Here he will fill your place, so far as it is possible for a new friend to succeed one of 20 years' standing, so far as I can find in my present condition one shadow of our ancient dreams. The intimacy between Fonsalbe and myself outstrips the progress of time, and has already the venerable character of antiquity. His confidence is boundless, and as he is naturally very prudent and reserved, you may think how I value it. I owe him a great deal. My life is something less useless, and it bids fair to become peaceful, despite this interior weight which he can at times cause me to forget, though he cannot remove it. He has restored to my deserts something of their enchanting beauty and of the romance of their alpine scenes. An unfortunate, a friend, finds some sweet hours among them which before he did not know. We take our walks in company, we discourse, we roam at random, and we are well off when together. Day by day I see plainer what hearts, by a contrary destiny, may be concealed among men who do not know them, and in an order of things where they were each in search of one another. Fonsalbe has lived sadly amidst perpetual disquietude and enjoyed nothing. He is 2 or 3 years my senior, and he feels that life is slipping by. I have told him the past is stranger to us than the existence of some unknown being. Nothing of reality remains to it. The memories which it leaves are too empty to be counted as good or evil by a wise man. What ground can there be for complaints or regrets about that which is no more? Had you once been the happiest of men, would the present time be better on that account? Had you suffered the most dreadful evils? He did not interrupt me, but I paused of my own accord. I felt that if he had lived for 10 years in a damp cellar, it must have permanently affected his health; that moral sufferings leave also ineffaceable impressions, and that when a man of sense deplores the misfortunes which he has apparently ceased to experience, it is in reality their manifold consequences which he is bewailing. When the opportunity of a good action has been voluntarily allowed to escape, it is not usually met with a second time, and those whose nature is to do good are thus visited for their negligence when the considerations of the moment or the interests of their passions prevent them. With this natural disposition, some of us combine a rational determination to follow it and the habit of silencing every opposing appetite. Their sole intention, their prime desire, is in every respect to fill well the part of man, and to do what they judge to be good. Can they witness without regret the withdrawal of every possibility of laudably accomplishing things which, belonging only to private life, are yet important, because so few men have any thought of performing them well? It is no small part of life, however narrow and secondary it may be considered, to fulfil in respect of one's wife, not only what is prescribed by duty, but all that is counselled or permitted by an enlightened reason. Great public functions are occupied honourably by many persons who would be incapable of acting in private as Fonsalbe would have done if his wife had been just in mind and stable in character, so qualified, in a word, as to follow his trend of thought. The pleasures of confidence and familiarity are very great among friends, but when vitalized and increased by all those details which the sense of the distinction of sex occasions, such delicate pleasures are unlimited. Is there a more delightful domestic condition than that of being good and just in the eyes of a beloved woman, doing all things for her, and exacting nothing in return, expecting only what is natural and upright on her part, but pretending to nothing that is exclusive, rendering her worthy of all esteem, and yet leaving her to her own initiative, sustaining, counselling, and protecting, but not ruling and not enslaving, making her a friend who not only conceals nothing but has nothing to conceal, without forbidding her things which become therefore indifferent, but which others would and ought to silence and to interdict, making her more perfect and at the same time more untrammelled than she could otherwise be, possessing all rights over her in order to confer upon her all freedom that an upright soul can accept, and compassing thus, at least in the obscurity of our life, the felicity of a human being who is fitted to receive happiness without corrupting it, and liberty of mind without being thereby corrupted. End of section 54. Section 55 of Obermann, This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth Year, Letter 88. Imenstrom, November 39. Here is the season of the year when it would be pleasant to write trifles for 5 or 6 hours at a stretch, to chat over insignificant things, to read clever parodies, in a word, to kill time. For several days past I have been more in this mood than ever, and you would stand a chance of the longest letter which has as yet been received at Bordeaux, if I had not to measure with Fonsalbe the fall of a tiny streamlet which he wishes to deflect towards the highest region of my meadows. It issues from a small glacier, and therefore no drought can affect it. I can, however, find time to tell you that the sky is precisely as I expected. There is no occasion for waiting on the part of those who live as it suits them, of those who accept nature only after the manner that they have arranged it, and are the men among mankind. The seasons, the time of day, the aspect of the heavens, to them all these are foreign. Their habits are like a monastic rule, constituting another law which studies itself alone. In natural law, they recognize no superior order, but simply a sequence of almost periodic incidents, a succession of means or impediments which must be adapted or overcome, according to the fantasia of circumstances. Without deciding whether this is an evil or not, I confess that it ought not to be otherwise. Public matters, and almost all kinds of affairs, have their times settled far in advance. They exact at a fixed epoch the solicitude of many men, and it is difficult to see that they could follow other conventions than those which are set apart for them. This necessity involves the rest. The city man, who is no longer dependent on natural events, and may even discover that they weary him, or if they serve him, that it is only by chance, decides, and that almost inevitably, to regulate his habits by his condition, in accordance with the general custom and the opinion of the class to which he belongs, or to which his ambition aspires. A large city always wears much about the same aspect. Its occupations or amusements are always pretty well alike, and a uniform way of living is voluntarily assumed therein. It would, in fact, be not a little inconvenient to rise before morning when the days are long, or to retire early to rest in December. To see the dawn is pleasant and salubrious in itself, but what next could one turn to after looking at it between the roofs, and after having heard a couple of canaries suspended from a skylight salute the rising sun? A fair heaven, a mild temperature, a night made brilliant by the moon, can effect no change in your manner. You end by asking, what is the use of it? And even while acknowledging that there must be an evil side to the order which prompts the question, it must be admitted that he who asks it is not altogether in the wrong. It would be eccentric at the least to arouse the hall porter suddenly and rush out early in the morning to hear sparrows chirping on the boulevard, or sitting down at the window of a drawing-room behind the curtains, so as to be isolated from the glare and noise, to devote a moment to nature and observe with recollection the stars of night shining in the street puddles. But in my Alpine ravine the day of 18 hours differs considerably from the day that is of 9 hours. Some habits of the city have clung to me because I find them pleasant and even desirable for one who is unable to assume all that are native to the place. Nevertheless, with 4 feet of snow and 12 degrees of frost, I cannot live actually in the same manner as when the drought kindles the pines in the woodland, and cheeses are made 5,000 feet up above me. One special quality of bad weather is necessary for me to work out of doors. one also for walking, another for riding, and yet another for sitting by the fire, though as a fact it is not cold, and one, in fine, for settling myself in the chimney corner of the kitchen amidst certain domestic operations which I reserve, as far as possible, especially for those days. You will note that, with a view of imparting my whole plan, I include what I shall put in practice in the future with what I may be now doing. I assume that I have already followed my mode of life along the lines that I am actually starting it, in the way that I am arranging it for future seasons and for things which remain to do. Of the fine days I dare not speak. To be candid, however, I have very little use for these, or rather I have ceased to have a use for them. Lovely weather adorns the country, and seems therein to augment existence. Such at least is the general experience. But for myself, I am the more discontented when it is the more beautiful. Once I struggled vainly against this inward discomfort, but did not prove the stronger. Subsequently I adopted another and much more convenient course. I have eluded the evil which I could not destroy. Fonsalbe condescends quite cheerfully to my weakness. The moderate excesses of the table are set aside for these unredeemed days, so beautiful in all eyes, so overwhelming in my own. There are to be periods of indolence, starting late and passing amidst artificial lights. If anything readable is chanced on, anything with a flavour of drollery, it is reserved for such mornings, and we are shut up, after dinner, in the society of wine or weak punch. In the freedom of familiarity, in the security of the man who has nothing to fear from his own heart, finding all else, even friendship itself, occasionally insufficient, eager to try a little of that folly which we have left without becoming wise, we seek the active and impassioned realization of the present thing in place of that precise and measured realization of all things, of that silent thought which chills man and overpowers his weakness. In this manner midnight comes, and one is delivered, yes, is delivered from time priceless and irreparable, which it is so often impossible not to lose, and more often impossible to love. When the brain has been deranged by imagination, observation, study, by revulsions and passions, by habits, possibly by reason itself, do you think that it is an easy matter to have always sufficient time, and above all, never to have too much? We are, it is true, solitaries, rustics, but we have our eccentricities notwithstanding. We are in the midst of nature, but we observe her. Furthermore, I believe that even in the savage state many men have too much soul not to weary themselves. We have lost the pastimes of a well-chosen society, and we pretend to be consoled for this by reflecting on the weariness, the futile and unavoidable constraints of society in general. Could one not at the same time have avoided seeing any one but intimate acquaintances? What shall we substitute for that manner which women alone can possess, which they have in the capitals of France, of that manner which they make so felicitous, and which in turn renders them equally necessary to the man of taste and to the man of passion? Therein is our solitude profound, and therein we are as in the desert void. In other respects, I should think that our way of living is practically the one which most employs our time. We have abandoned the turmoil of the town. The silence which encompasses us seems at first to impart a constancy and inflexibility to the hours which would be depressing to the man accustomed to the methods of a rapid life. Insensibly, and by a change in regimen, one becomes somewhat inured to it. By attaining calmness, the days prove very little longer here than elsewhere. If I had not 100 reasons, some substantial, the rest rather trivial, for not living like a mountaineer, I should have shared his hardy and frugal life. Without agitation, without hope, without desire, without initiative, imagining nothing, thinking scarcely of anything, wishing for nothing further, never dreaming of anything new, I should pass from one season to another, and from this day to old age, as one passes long days in the winter, without perceiving their continuous dwindling. When the night came, I should conclude merely that lights were wanted, and when the snows began, I should judge that the fires must be started. From time to time I should get some intelligence of you, and I should put down my pipe for a moment to reply that I was well. I should grow contented. I should begin to find that the days were swallowed up rapidly enough in the cold tranquillity of the Alps, and I should lapse slowly into that sequence of incuriosity, oblivion, tardiness, wherein the man of the mountains reposes amidst the abandonment of these mighty solitudes. End of section 55. Section 56 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Ninth year, letter 89. Immenstrom, December 6, 9. I have wished on the day itself to send you news of this moment, once desired so much, and one which might mark a new era in my life, had I come back fully from my dreams, or it may be if I had lost nothing of my errors. Now I am entirely at home, all the work is over, the time has at last come for an orderly arrangement of life which will occupy some hours and cause other hours to be forgotten. Now I can do as I wish. The only misfortune is that I am not quite sure of that which I ought to do. Ease, all the same, is a pleasant thing. Everything can then be arranged, convenience studied, all chosen and regulated. Given easy circumstances, the misfortunes of ordinary life can be avoided by reason. Rich people would be happy if they possessed ease, but they prefer bringing themselves to poverty. I sympathize with those who are driven by the tyranny of circumstance to increase their establishments to the extreme limit of their resources. Domestic happiness is impossible without the moderate superfluity which is necessary to a sense of security. If greater peace and better temper are found in cabins than in palaces, it is because comfort is more uncommon in the palace than it is in the cabin. Amidst all their wealth, the unfortunates do not know how to live. Had they been capable of restricting their pretensions and those of their families, all would have been theirs, for money offers all, but in hands so thoughtless it can accomplish nothing. So, however, they are determined to have it, and they must follow their bent. Be it our part, at least, to furnish other examples in the midst of our mediocrity. To avoid being truly unhappy, one condition only is requisite. It is named reason, wisdom, or virtue. For contentment, I believe that 4 conditions are necessary: the full possession of reason, health, some fortune, and a modicum of that happiness which is afforded by the control of our own destiny. It is true that the last 3 are void in the absence of reason, and that reason counts for much without them. It may either provide those later on, or at the worst console us for their loss, but it cannot be imparted by them, and even what they give without it has only an external splendour, a mere seeming and show, which cannot long deceive the heart. With capability and knowledge, let it be admitted that we are well off on this earth. Capability without knowledge is highly dangerous, and knowledge in the absence of capability is useless and distressing. As for me, who make no pretence to live, but simply observe life, I shall do well to take refuge in at least imagining the part of a man. I propose to spend 4 hours daily in my study, and this I shall term working, though it is not all the same, for it is forbidden to turn a key or to hem a handkerchief on the day of rest, but it is allowable to do a chapter of the primeval world. As I have made up my mind to write, I should be inexcusable if I did not now set about it. All that I require is at my command: leisure, quietude, a small but sufficient library, and in place of a secretary, a friend to see that I persevere, and to testify that it is possible by writing to do some good sooner or later. Before occupying myself with the weakness of men, I must for the last time speak to you of my own. Fonsalbe, from whom I have no other secrets, but who has no inkling of this one, makes me daily conscious, both by his presence and by our conversations, in which the name of his sister recurs so frequently, how far off I have been from that forgetfulness which is my sole refuge. He has mentioned me in his letters to Madame D., and has seemed to do so at my instance. I saw no way to prevent it, as I could give no reason to Fonsalbe, but I am the more sorry, because she must think it contradictory that I am failing to act in the way that I have myself laid down. Do not regard as fantastic the bitterness which I find in these memories, and the fruitless pains which I take to dispel them, as if I were not sure of myself. I am neither fanatical nor vacillating in my rectitude. My intentions remain under my control, but not so are my thoughts. And if I have all the assurance of the man who wills what he ought, I have also all the weakness of one who has resolved nothing. Yet I protest against the suggestion that I am in love. I am too unhappy for that. How can I explain? It would be impossible for you to understand me, as I do not understand myself. It is now many years since I saw her, but fated to possess only the dream of my existence, the only consequence was that her memory became bound up with the consciousness of the continuity of my being. So much for those times whereof all is lost. The need of love became existence itself, and the consciousness of things was but expectation and presentiment of that hour which heralds the light of life. But if in the vapid course of my days there had been one found which seemed to offer the sole good that nature then held for my heart, that memory was within me to drive me from it. Without having actually loved, I found myself disqualified for love henceforth, like those men in whom a profound passion destroys the power of experiencing a fresh affection. This memory was not love, since I had no consolation therein, and no sustenance. It left me in the void, and seemed to retain me therein. It gave me nothing, and seemed to oppose anything being given me. Hence I was deprived both of the delicious intoxication which love fosters, and of that bitter yet voluptuous melancholy in which our hearts elect to be consumed when they are filled with an ill-starred love. I have no desire to recount the wearisome story of my weariness. I have buried my disastrous fortune in my deserts. She would win away that which surrounds me. She very nearly involved you. You have sought to forsake all and become dejected and useless as I am, but I have forced you to return to your distractions. You have even believed that I have found some for myself. I have quietly encouraged your error. You know my calm resembled the smile of despair. I could have wished you to be deceived longer. I chose a time of jest to write to you, when I laughed with pity at myself, my fate, many things about which men groan, while repeating that they are coming to an end. I am telling you far too much, but I am excited and overwhelmed by the feeling of my destiny. There is nothing that I can seek for in myself without meeting the ghost of that which will be never granted me. In speaking to you of her, I can never be anything but myself. I do not know in what sense I should exercise reserve as to this. She felt even as myself. We spoke a common language. Are those who understand each other so numerous? All the same, I did not yield to such manifold illusions. I reiterate that I do not wish you to dwell upon times which should be buried in oblivion and are already in the abyss. The dream of joy has passed with their phantoms in the death of man and the ages. Why do these memories rise from that which has been dead so long? To diffuse over the living remnants of man the bitterness of the universal sepulchre into which he must go down. I have no thought of justifying to you this bruised heart with which you are but too familiar, which, amidst its ruins, preserves nothing but the unrest of life. You know well, and you alone, its extinct hopes, its inexplicable desires, its immeasurable wants. Seek not on your part to excuse it, sustain it rather, upraise its fragments. Restore to it, if you have the power, the fire of life, the calm of reason, all the impulse of genius, all the impassibility of the wise. I would never wish you to pity its unsearchable follies. At length, by an unexpected chance, I met her in the vicinity of the Saône on a day of sadness. Simple in itself, this event astonished me notwithstanding. It was sweet to see her occasionally, an ardent soul, tranquil, fatigued, disillusioned, immense, must settle the disquiet and unceasing torment of my heart. The grace of her whole being, the inexpressible refinement in her voice, her every motion. Bear in mind that I do not love her, and realize all my woe. But my dejection grew more constant and more bitter. If Madame D. had been free, I should then have had the satisfaction of being wretched after my own manner, but she was not, and I withdrew before it became impossible for me to support elsewhere the burden of time. Then did all things weary me, but now all are indifferent. It may be even that a few things amuse me. I could then talk to you of all this. I am no longer meant for love. I am extinct. I might make a good husband, for my power of attachment is considerable. I begin to think of the pleasures of love. I am no longer worthy of a mistress. Love himself could not give me more than a wife and a friend. How our affections change, how the heart stultifies itself, how life passes uncompleted. I told you then how much I loved to be wearied in her company of all which makes up the delights of life. Better far did I like the quiet evenings, but that could not last. At times, though rarely, I forget that I am on earth as a shadow walking up and down, seeing but grasping nothing. Such is my doom. When I have sought to escape it, I have been visited. When an illusion begins, my woes increase. I have felt very near to happiness, and I have been alarmed. Perhaps these ashes that I believe extinct could yet be rekindled. It was necessary to depart. And now I am in a desert valley. I seek to forget how to live. I have taken refuge in tea to compose me, and in wine to distract me. I build, I grow, and in all this I seek some distraction. I have come across a few good people, and I propose to frequent the tavern in search of men. I rise and retire late. I am slow over eating. I busy myself with things of all kinds. I try all positions. I love the night, and I make the time fly. I get rid of my cold hours, and long to see them in the past. Fonsalbe is her brother. We speak of her. I cannot prevent it, for he is very fond of her. Fonsalbe will be my friend. It is my wish. He also is very lonely. I wish it on my own account. What would become of me without him? But he will never know how much the idea of his sister is present in these solitudes, these darksome gorges, these romantic waters. They were voiceless, they will be ever so. This idea does not invest them with the peace of forgetfulness of the world, but the abandonment of deserts. We stood one evening beneath the pines. Their waving tops were filled with the rumours of the mountain. We spoke. He wept about her, but a brother has tears. I make no resolutions, I give no pledges, I despise these protestations which are so vain, this eternity which man deems that he can add to his passions of a day. I promise nothing, I know nothing, all passes, all men change, but either I deceive myself greatly, or it will never be mine to love. When the devotee has dreamed of his beatitude, he no longer seeks it in the world below, and should he lose his ravishing illusions, he would still find no charm in things so far inferior to his former visions. And she too will draw the chain of her days with that disillusioned strength, with that calm of sorrow which becomes her so well. Many among us might perhaps be less in their true place if they were less remote from happiness. This life elapsing amidst indifference, surrounded by all the charms of existence, and in weariness with health unalterable, these chagrins void of humour, this dejection without bitterness, this smile of pains concealed, this simplicity which foregoes all when it might pretend to all, these regrets unaccompanied by murmuring, this renunciation without effort, this discouragement which meets affliction with disdain. How many neglected goods, how many forgotten losses, how many faculties with no will to make use of them! All this is replete with harmony and belongs to her alone. Content, happy, possessing all which seemed due to her, she might perhaps have been less herself. Adversity is good for one who can bear it thus. If happiness came at length, what would she do with it? The time is over. What then remains to her? What will remain to us in this dereliction of life, sole destiny which we share in common? When all escapes, even the visions of our desires, when the dream of the amiable and the honourable grows old itself in our dubious thought, when harmony with its ideal adornment comes down from the heavenly places, approaches earth, and finds itself enveloped in mists and in darkness, when nothing survives of all our wants, our affections, our hopes, when we ourselves pass in the ceaseless flight of all things, and in the inevitable instability of the world, my friends, my only friends, she whom I have loved, you who dwell far from me, you alone who still impart to me the sensation of life, what will remain of us, and what are we? End of section 56. Section 57 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Supplement, 10th year, Letter 90, Imenstrom, June 28, 10. Franz has his sister here. She has come unattended, meaning to remain for a few days only with her brother. You would find her at this day as amiable and wonderful as ever, more so perhaps than ever. This unexpected apparition, the altered circumstances, the ineffaceable memories, place, season, everything seemed to harmonize. I must add that if more finished beauty is conceivable from an artist's standpoint, it would be impossible to combine more perfectly all that generally constitutes the charm of woman for me. We could not welcome her here as you did at Bordeaux. At the foot of these mountains we had to act according to circumstances. There were 2 meadows to be mown in the evening till a fairly late hour, and the same work had to be recommenced in the early morning so as to avoid the heat of the day. It had occurred to me already to take advantage of this opportunity and give a little treat to my labourers, for which purpose musicians were hired from Vevey. A collation, or, if you preferred, a kind of rural supper, beginning at midnight, and varied sufficiently to suit even the taste of the reapers, was designed to fill the interval between the toils of evening and morning. It happened that, shortly before the close of day, I was passing the foot of a short staircase, at the top of which she was standing. She called me by name, and although it was indeed her voice, there was something in it that was unforeseen, unaccustomed, altogether inimitable. I looked up without answering, but was unaware that I did not answer. A fanciful semi-daylight, an airy veil, a kind of mist enveloped her, giving to her form a vagueness which dissolved the suggestion of drapery. It brought a perfume of ideal beauty, of voluptuous illusion, with an instant of inconceivable reality. It is true, therefore, I said to myself when I was a couple of paces away, this attachment has a trace of passion, and the yoke has existed. From such weakness other incertitudes have followed. Those years are past recall, but today is still free, today is still my own. After a word to Fonsalbe, I absented myself. I took my way to the upper part of the valley, walking almost noiselessly in my deep preoccupation. In spite of the unmistakable warning which had come to me, the illusion persisted, and the strength of the past seemed invincible. All those dreams of loving and of being alone no longer flowed over me in the peaceful obscurity of a desert place. There was even a moment when I could have exclaimed, like many others whose weakness I've often censured, to possess her and to die. Notwithstanding, to realize in the silence that tomorrow all things on earth may end, means also to estimate with a surer glance how the gifts of life have been used, and what ought to be done with them. What I have done with them. Still young, I pause at the fatal moment, she and the desert. That would indeed be the heart's triumph. But no, forgetfulness of the world, and her wanting, such is my law. Toil austere and the future. I found myself at the bend of the valley, between the rocks where the torrent plunges down, and the songs that I had chosen myself just beginning far away. But the simple motion of the air dissolved from time to time these festal sounds, and I knew the moment when they would cease. The torrent, on the contrary, persisted with unvarying force, flowing past, flowing forever, even as the centuries. The flight of the water is like the flight of our days. It has been said often, and will be re-echoed after 1,000 years. For us, the passage of the waters will be ever the most striking image of the inexorable lapse of time. Voice of the torrent sounding in the midst of shadows, only solemn voice under the peace of the heavens, be thou heard alone. There is nothing serious except that which is permanent. Seen from above, what are all those bonds from which we shall be separated with our last breath? Shall I falter between a chance meeting and the ends of my destiny, between an alluring fancy and the just, the generous employment of the powers of thought? Shall I stoop to the idea of an imperfect bond, of an affection void of object, of a blind pleasure? Am I not acquainted with the promise which she made to her family when she became a widow? That promise forbids a complete union. The question is therefore simple, and it should not detain me. What could there be worthy of man in the deceptive pastime of a barren love? To consecrate the faculties of life to mere pleasure is to deliver one's self to eternal death. Feeble as those faculties are, I am answerable concerning them. They must bear their fruits. I will preserve these benefits of existence. I will honour them. I will not suffer myself at least to grow weak within until the inevitable moment. O depths of space, are we permitted to behold you in vain? The majesty of the night is repeated from age to age. Woe unto every soul who finds delight in servitude. Are we made to enjoy here the rapture of desires? The expectation over, the success achieved, what have we to say for the satisfaction of a few brief days? If this be the sum of life, it is nothing. A year, 10 years of pleasure, this is a futile amusement, with too swift a bitterness afterwards. What will remain of those desires when, suffering or foolishly distracted, the later generations are trampling on our ashes? Let us account as little that which dissolves so quickly. Amidst the great comedy of the world, let us seek another heritage. Only of our stronger resolutions will some portion perhaps survive. It will be said that man is perishable. It is possible, but let us perish resisting, and if the void await us, do not so act as to deserve it. I fell, as you know, into discouragement, believing that my tendencies were already changed. I was too easily persuaded that my youth was over, but as I think you remarked subsequently, these differences were caused by errors of regimen, and this has been rectified for the most part. I had observed but indifferently the mobility which characterizes me and contributes so much to my uncertainties is constantly so great an inconstancy, though much more in impressions than in opinions, or even in propensities. Nor is it a part of the progress of the years. It returns to that which it was. My habit of restraining and repressing forthwith all my inward impulses caused me not infrequently to misconstrue oppositions myself. I see now that 40 years hence I shall not be more different than I have already been 100 times between 1/4 of an hour and another. So sways the limber summit of a tree on the windy height. If you revisit it in years to come, you will find it still swaying, and still after the same manner. Each incident, each notion which survives, the smallest details, whether opportune or the reverse, a few memories, some slight fears, all these fortuitous emotions can change for me the aspect of the world, the estimation of our faculties, and the value of our days. Whilst things indifferent are discoursed to me, and I listen with tranquillity and indolence, whilst reproaching myself with my coldness in such conversations, I am content with those who forgive it me. I have passed frequently from the loathing of this limited existence, disquieted and embarrassed by all, to a not less natural consciousness of the curious variety of things, or the amusing sagacity which invites us to go on enjoying them for a time. It seems to me, notwithstanding, that what offers with so much facility another aspect is less the grand phenomenon in its totality than each consequence, which is in relation to us less the general order than my particular aptitude. This visible order has two aspects. The one attracts, the other perplexes us, but all depends on a certain confidence in ourselves. This I lose continually, and it is reproduced also continually. Weak as we are, how great is the adroitness of our industry! A favourable chance, a softer wind, a gleam of light, the swaying of a flower in blossom, the very dewdrops tell me that I shall yet set all in order. But the clouds gather, the bullfinch ceases singing, a letter is delayed, a thought, ill expressed in my writing, misses its mark, and then I see nothing but obstacles, delays, obstinate resistance, betrayed designs, annoyances for the happy, sufferings for the crowd, and I myself the sport of the power which overwhelms us all. Such mobility, at least, is not calculated to shake the principles of conduct. It does not signify even that the end appears merely as a probability, if only it be unique. Strengthened in one sense, let us not tarry for other lights. We can walk along pathways that have been scarcely explored, so all is decided. I am still as I was, and if I resolve, I shall also be that which I might be. It is a trifle, assuredly, but, to sum all, do not let us fall beneath ourselves. June 30. I write to you at great length, expressing in many words what I might convey in a few lines, but it is my characteristic, and then also I have plenty of leisure. Nothing engrosses me, nothing takes hold of me. I seem still to be suspended in the void. One day more, as I think, and one only I need. Then the mood will end, for I have determined it. But just now all things seem sad to me. I am not undecided, but moved even to a kind of stupor and lassitude. I continue my letter so that I may lean upon you. I remained yet a while by myself, but feeling less alien already to the tranquil harmony of nature. I joined the party during supper and before the songs had ceased. Henceforth you need look no longer for inexcusable idleness or the old irresolution on my part. Health and ease are facilities that are by no means invariably united. I possess them and shall make use of them for the future. May this declaration become my rule of life. If I remonstrate with men about their voluntary weakness, is it not desirable that I should indulge in none myself? You know that I had formerly some inclination towards Africa, but at the present time everything has combined to render a design impracticable, which for the rest would have required further maturing, and now it would be too late to undertake those studies which should have preceded its execution. What then remains for me to do? I believe definitely that my vocation is writing, nor need you ask on what subjects or following what model, for as to the first point, you are practically acquainted with them already, while as regards the second, I shall assuredly imitate no one, unless in some short passage and by a kind of caprice. I should consider it exceedingly misplaced to assume the manner of another when I can have one of my own. What purpose does writing serve for him who has no such manner, who, in other words, is never carried away or inspired? And now as to the question of style, it will neither be severely classical nor inconsiderately free. To deserve being read, it is necessary that all true fitness should be studied. If you ask me who is to be judge, I must answer that it must, I suppose, be myself. Have I not read those authors whose work has been executed with circumspection, as well as those who have written with more of independence? It is for me to make choice of a suitable means according to the measure of my possibilities, having regard on the one hand to the nature of my subject, as well as to the age in which I live, and on the other to my disposition, without intentionally ignoring admitted rules, but also without expressly considering them. My guarantees of success will be the sole natural guarantees. If it be insufficient to give expression to what is true, and to do so in a convincing manner, I shall fail unavoidably, and there the matter ends. I do not think it indispensable to find approval during one's lifetime, unless indeed one is condemned to the misfortune of depending on the pen for a subsistence. Let those take precedence who seek their laurels in the salon. Pass on, society persons, men of consideration in countries where everything depends upon influence, you who are prolific in the fashionable notions of the day, in the books of a clique, in devices of producing an effect, who, even after adopting everything, leaving everything, then reassuming everything and exhausting everything, still find something to fill up some indefinite pamphlets, so as to be able to say, here it is put into words that are expressive and skilfully strung together, even if a trifle hackneyed. Pass on, I say, deluding and deluded men, for after all you pass quickly, and it is fair that you should have your day. Show yourselves therefore today in all your skill and prosperity. May not the utility of a work be reasonably assured without dishonouring it by intrigues to increase the fame of its author? Whether you remain in retreat or even live quietly in a capital, will your name in the end be altogether unknown? Will not your books sell gradually out all the same? Whether a certain number of copies are placed with the booksellers or sent to take their chance among the libraries in the principal towns, sooner or later the production will find its place, and no less surely than if you had solicited commendation. Thus my task is indicated. It only remains for me to fulfil it, if not with felicity and renown, at least with a certain zeal and dignity. I renounce much, and am almost contented with simply avoiding suffering. With employment, hope, and friendship, shall I have cause to complain in retreat? Occupation without overwork contributes essentially to the peace of the soul, the least illusory of all blessings. The need of pleasure is supplanted, for there is enjoyment in simple advantages, just as multitudes of healthy men adapt themselves to the most ordinary viands. Who does not acknowledge that hope is preferable to memories? In this constant flux of our life, it is only the future which is important. What has come to pass has already vanished, and even the present escapes us, unless we can use it as an instrument. Pleasant recollections in the past do not strike me as a considerable advantage, except for weak imaginations which are exhausted after a little quickening. Such persons, having pictured things otherwise than they can be, become infatuated, and when they are disabused by experience, they cease to imagine anything, because exaggerated imagination is forbidden them. Veridic fictions being thus, so to speak, interdicted, they must have recourse to glowing memories, otherwise there is no thought which can please them. But the man of just and powerful imagination can always form a sufficiently positive idea of different blessings, when fortune leaves him in tranquillity. He is not of those whose knowledge is in such matters restricted to what he learned in the past. Our correspondence and Fonsalbe will remain to me for the daily sweetening of life. These two bonds will suffice me. Even in our letters, let us seek for the truth without ponderous dissertations and without headstrong systems. Let us call upon the immutable truth. What else can sustain the soul, at times fatigued by its vague hopes, but far more astonished at itself, far more abandoned when it has lost alike the languors and delights of such active uncertainty? Justice at least has its evidence. For the most part you receive the moral lights in peace. I pursue them in my unrest. Ours is an abiding union. End of section 57. Section 58 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Supplement, Letter 91, without known date. I have never yet recounted the awkward adventure which happened to me on a certain day when I had determined to cross the Italian Alps. The experience has been vividly brought back by my coming across the following words. It is possible that this life has been granted us only to meet, in spite of our weaknesses, with some opportunities for accomplishing manfully that which the moment demands of us. Thus, to employ all our powers to the purpose, without passion and also without fear, is to be man in all truth. This satisfaction is, however, rarely vouchsafed. As for myself, I only half experienced it among those mountains, as it was simply my personal safety that was concerned. I can only give account of the episode by recourse to details that are altogether personal, as it consisted wholly in these. I was going to Aosta, and was already in Le Valais, when I heard a stranger remark at the inn that he would not take the risk of crossing St. Bernard without a guide. Forthwith I resolved to take it in my own case. I assumed that by observing the disposition of the gorges or the direction of the torrents, I could reach the hospice before the muleteers without information from them. I left Martigny on foot in the best possible weather. Impatient to come across some impressive scenery, if only beheld from a distance, I walked the more briskly, as above Saint Branchier I encountered nothing of the kind. On reaching Litis, I took it for granted that I should pass no other hostelry between there and the hospice itself. At that of Litis the bread was exhausted, and no vegetables could be had. A small piece of mutton alone remained, and this I did not touch. I took very little wine, but that little at such an unaccustomed hour so inclined me to darkness and rest that I fell asleep under the shelter of some bushes. When I awoke, being without a watch, I had no idea that I had been several hours in this condition. When I took again to the road, my one hope and intention was to reach my destination. Nature does not always encourage the illusions which she has in store for us notwithstanding. No distraction presented itself, neither beauty in the valleys, the singularity of costumes, nor even the effect of the wonted mountain air. The sky had changed its aspect. Dark clouds enveloped the peaks which I approached, and yet they did not undeceive me as to the time, since at such elevations they often gather very quickly. A few minutes afterwards snow began falling heavily. I passed the village of Saint-Pierre without inquiring of any one. I was resolved to pursue my enterprise in spite of the cold and the want of a beaten track further on. It was absolutely impossible to choose one's way with certainty, nor could I discern the rocks until I came actually in contact with them. Yet this also I referred to the combined darkness of cloud and snow, and I did not realize my situation till night only could account for the increasing gloom. The rough ice at the foot of which I arrived, and the want of any practicable track for mules, made it evident that I had missed the way. I came to a pause, intending to reflect at my leisure, but a complete numbness of the arms speedily dissuaded me. While it was impossible to await daylight in the place where I was, it seemed equally out of question to reach the monastery, from which I might be separated by abysses. One course only offered, to be guided by the sound of the water, so as to reach the principal stream itself, which, falling from point to point, makes for the last dwellings I had observed in my descent. I was now truly in darkness, and amidst rocks from which extrication would have been difficult even in daylight, but the presence of danger sustained me. I must either perish or get back without loss of time to the village, which would, I reckoned, be nearly 3 leagues distant. I scored my first success rather quickly. I came on the torrent, which it was essential that I should quit no more, for if I became entangled in further rocks, I might be puzzled how to continue my descent. Worn by the effect of ages, the bed of the Drance must, I thought, prove less rugged, at least in many places, than the tortuous windings of the neighbouring masses of rock. The battle against obstacles now began, and so also the peculiar enjoyment occasioned by the magnitude of the danger. I waded into the turbulent and variable current, resolved to follow it till the hazardous experiment was either terminated by some serious accident, or till I saw the village lights. I surrendered myself, therefore, to the course of that glacial water. When it fell from the height, I let myself fall with it. On one occasion the drop was so great that I thought the end had come, but a basin of some depth received me. I have no notion how I scrambled out of it. I fancy that when hands failed me, my teeth must have clutched some jutting point of stone. As for my eyes, from these I had little help, and I have an idea that I shut them when I anticipated a shock of any extra violence. I pressed onward with an eagerness which no fatigue could check, content apparently to follow a fixed impulse, to sustain a determined effort. As I gradually became inured to this rude progress, to this species of audacity, I forgot the only refuge which I could reach, namely the village of Saint-Pierre, until a gleam of light revealed it. I beheld it with an indifference which doubtless rose more from want of thought than from true courage, but I struggled as best I could to the inn, where the inhabitants were gathered about the fire. The light of this fire shone through an aperture in the shutter of the little window, and it was to this that I was indebted for my life. It was the kind of inn that is usually met with in the mountains, and much was naturally wanting, but I found the attentions of which I stood most in need. Placed in the inner angle of the great chimney corner, which was the principal feature of the house, I passed an hour or more in forgetfulness of that exalted condition and its singular delight which I had experienced. Null and depressed after my deliverance, I did whatever I was required. They gave me mulled wine, unaware that I had far greater need of more solid nourishment. One of my hosts had seen me scaling the mountain towards the end of the day in a snow squall of the kind which is dreaded even by the mountaineers. He had afterwards remarked in the village that a stranger had passed going up, and that it meant destruction at such an hour. When these honest fellows realized that I owed my escape to the defective condition of their shutter, one of them cried in his patois, "My God, that it should be owing to us!" The next morning they brought me my clothes, well dried and tolerably repaired, but I could not shake off a somewhat violent shivering, and in addition to this, several feet of snow on the ground made me shrink from continuing my journey without necessity. I spent a portion of the day with the priest of this poor village, and stayed with him to dinner, the first meal that I had taken for more than 40 hours. On the morrow the snow had melted under the beams of the morning sun. I accomplished without a guide the 5 arduous leagues, and the feverish symptoms left me in the course of my toil. I had a good welcome at the hospice, but was unfortunately not able to approve of everything. The variety of meats, which under the circumstances could not be ascribed to hospitality, but rather to refinement, appeared to me out of place. I thought much the same of the chapel. Solemn simplicity would have been more suited than embellishments to a church among the mountains. I stayed the night at the little village of Saint Remy in Italy. The torrent of the Loire breaks against an angle of the hostelry walls. My window was left open, and throughout the night the clamour alternately woke and lulled me to sleep, to my great satisfaction. Lower down in the valley I came upon some of those afflicted people whose enormous goitres had shocked me on the farther side of Saint Bernard, when I first explored Le Valais. At a quarter of a league distant from Saint Maurice, there is a village which, owing to its unusual situation, is so sheltered from cold winds that laurels and pomegranates flourish through all seasons in the open. This, however, is little heeded by the villagers, who, protected themselves from the frost, and furthermore afflicted by cretinism, vegetate at the foot of their vast rocks, indifferent even as to the passing and repassing of strangers so close at hand across the river. I decided on returning to Switzerland to have a nearer view of these people, sunk in such heavy ignorance, poor but unaware of the fact, and enfeebled without actually suffering. I am inclined to think that such unfortunates are happier than ourselves. Except for the scrupulous exactitude of my narrative, its interest would be so little that even your friendship would fail to discover it. For myself, I recall but too well a fatigue which I did not realize at the time, though it has permanently deprived me of all sureness of foot. Still less am I likely to forget that so far the only 2 hours of my life in which I was most truly alive, least discontented with myself, least remote from the intoxication of happiness, were those in which, pierced by the cold, outworn with struggles, in direst need, driven from precipice to precipice before I was aware of their existence, and escaping from them alive to my astonishment, I repeated continually to myself, and in my pride to myself only, with no one to hear me. Still in this moment I wish that which I ought, and I do that which I wish. Conclusion of an undated letter. From age to age, how many unfortunates have declared that flowers exist only to conceal our chains, to cheat us all at the beginning, and to hold us enslaved to the end. They do more, though perchance to no greater purpose. They seem to hint of that which mortal mind can never fathom. If flowers were merely beautiful in our eyes, they would still enchant us. But at times we are carried away by their fragrance, as by some happy condition of existence, as by some sudden appeal, some return to the most hidden life. Whether I have gone in search of these unseen emanations, whether, and more often, they have offered themselves, whether they have come upon me by surprise, I accept them as a potent, though uncertain expression of a thought, the secret of which is shut in and hidden by the material world. Colours have also their own eloquence. All things are possibly a symbol, but scents are more penetrating, possibly because they are more mysterious. And although in the normal relations of life we must have palpable truths, the great motions of the soul have truth of another order for their principle, the essentially true, inaccessible, notwithstanding in these our wavering ways. Jonquil, violet, tuberose, yours are moments only, lest our weakness should be overcome, or perchance that we may be left to the incertitude wherein our spirit works, now full of nobility and now of discouragement. No, I have never beheld the Cingalese cindrimal, the Persian gulmikek, the P.G. Hong of southern China, but the jonquil and the jasmine suffice to make me say that, such even as we are, we might be denizens of a better world. What would I have? To hope, and then hope no more is to be or to cease from being, and of such doubtless is man. But how comes it that after the songs of a deeply moved voice, after the fragrance of flowers and all the longings of imagination, all the ecstasies of thought, still man fails to die? And it may be, when destiny decrees it, that we shall hear the secret approach of a woman, full of loving allurement, and from behind some curtain, but assured that she is wholly visible in the rays of the setting sun, she shall reveal herself with no other veil, for the first time, retreating precipitately and returning of her own accord, smiling at her voluptuous resolve. Yet in the end we are condemned to grow old. Where now are the violets which bloomed for the old generations? There are two flowers which in a sense seem to bloom in silence and almost devoid of fragrance, but by which I am more attracted than I can say, on account of their persistence. The recollections which they awake recall the past vividly, as if such bonds of time heralded happy days. These simple flowers are the field barbel and the early Easter daisy, the meadow marguerite. The barbel is the flower of rural life. It must be seen in the liberty of natural leisure, amidst wheat fields, farmyard sounds, and crowing of cocks by the footpaths of the old husbandmen. The sight of it might well lead to tears. The violet and the meadow daisy are rivals. They bloom in the same season, with the same simplicity. At the first dawn of springtide we are captivated by the violet. The daisy wins our love year in and year out. They are in the same relation to each other as a painted portrait is to a marble bust. The violet recalls the purest emotion of love. So does love offer itself to clean hearts. But in the last resource, even love like this, so persuasive and bland, is but a beautiful accident of life. It vanishes, but the peace of the country places is with us to the latest hour. The daisy is the patriarchal symbol of this bland repose. If I should reach old age, if on a day still thought haunted, but ceasing from speech with men, there should be a friend at my side to receive my farewell to earth, let my chair be set down on the short grass. May there be peaceful daisies in front of me, beneath the sun, under the vast sky, that in relinquishing this fleeting life I may recall something of the infinite illusion. End of section 58. End of Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942.